We were put on this planet to coexist. We complement each other, men and women. The more divided you are as a people, the worse off you will be.
Do y'all understand how stupid some of y'all sound arguing about who's the prize, man or woman? Do you understand how cringy y'all sound? How arrogant y'all sound? Men, women, all humans. No one is above anybody else. You are not above a man is not above you. Prize. But I thought we weren't objects.
Between the red pill, alpha male, pick me, trad wife, femininity coach, pop the balloon, 20 versus 1, I just can't. You guys, I just don't know why people can't just do what works for them. Do what works for you. My issue really isn't even the content that people talk about in these spaces. My issue is that instead of going to actively find someone who believes what you believe, you want to push that belief on someone else who doesn't, right? You have a man who says, oh, I like traditional women. I like women that like to take care of men. I like women who like to have children. I like women who like to clean, who like to cook, who like to wash my drawers. Okay, there's plenty of women who want to do that. Go find one. No, you don't want to go find them. You want to find a woman who's the complete opposite of that and make her into something that she's not. It is the same thing with so many women. I want a feminine man. No betas. This, that, and the third. Okay, well, go find that.
The conversation we should realistically be having is how we dismantle patriarchy and bring everyone to the table. I typically only see men say this, though, and they're not wrong, but men are also the reason why we can't come together. Yes, women and men need each other, but systemically, men have put women down. It is built into our laws that women receive less. It's built into our laws that women are looked at as less. It's built into our laws that women are seen as property. So how are we gonna come together and communicate and compromise if one particular gender doesn't even see the other gender as a person? So when men start saying we need to come together, we need to kumbaya, we're better as one, I kind of don't believe y'all. Because what have you done to create an environment that will allow for everybody to come together? That's why I think y'all full of shit, because you haven't dismantled patriarchy, because at the end of the day, you know you still benefit from it.
Feminism and the left in the present day do absolutely nothing to support men. They do the opposite. They demonise, they stigmatise, and they ignore their problems. Why would young men be drawn to an ideology that on the surface at least comes across like it hates men for being men? And that is not what feminism is meant to be about.
This is part 3 to our Gender Wars series. Over the past 2 weeks, we've covered the Gender Wars timeline from first wave feminism all the way up until now. So now we're going to analyze the intersections between the political and dating gender wars and what we can do from here.
Bitch, what I was trying to say is this situation got me so wet and so dry at the same time. Exactly.
What's up, bitches? Welcome back to another episode of So Wet, So Dry. I'm one of your hosts, Fiji, like the island, like the water. I just sold my first item on Depop, so catch me having a second stream of income, even though it was only $12. And I work in social media and marketing.
And I'm your other host, Autumn. Like the season, I am making big changes in my life for 2025, and I work in entertainment. If you guys are new here, what we do on So Wet, So Dry is we explore duality through deep diving topics about sex, relationships, and personal identity, all where internet trends and reality collide. We do post polls over on our Instagram for every single episode, so you guys can answer our questions and submit stories for the episode. So make sure you're following us there at So Wet, So Dry, the O's are zeros. In whatever platform you're listening on, make sure you either subscribe or follow. You can like the video. It is so important to leave a comment. That's the most important thing to us because we want to keep the conversation going. And you can also rate us on platforms like Spotify, Amazon, or written reviews exclusively on Apple.
Make sure you guys stay tuned to the end of the episode where we wrap up with what we're wet, dry, and still confused about the topic, because it is okay to still be confused.
So if you guys missed the last 2 weeks of episodes, which I highly recommend going to watch our timeline before this episode because it'll make a lot more sense. But if you did miss it, essentially these were the key points of said Gender Wars timeline. So we got first wave feminism, suffrage, white women. Second wave feminism, race, class, capitalism, questionable. Men's liberation starts. We have black feminism. Third wave feminism, intersectional feminism, thanks to Kimberly Crenshaw. We have the Anita Hill hearings. Men's liberation. Warren Farrell was like, feminists hate men. Let's get into it. Then we have pickup artistry. Fourth wave feminism starts. Gay rights, same-sex marriage, trans rights, bathroom rights, pronouns. Black Lives Matter, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, say her name, say their name. Juneteenth, rise of hustle. Rise of hustle culture, influencers, OnlyFans, girl boss feminism, corporate feminism, men are trash, incels, Me Too, digital feminism, hashtag real men don't rape, empowerment feminism, Beyonce, red pill, manosphere, Andrew Tate, Hypergamy, Shira 7, Wizard Liz, celibacy, Roe v. Wade overturned. Obviously, a lot more happened, but those are kind of the key points that we have. But again, go watch those first parts before this. So this all got us thinking. We need to analyze all of this again politically and also in our dating lives. So what we've gathered is at the end of the day, there is a lot of loneliness and a lot of people wanting love. But we are all being manipulated by and actively reinforcing things like patriarchy, capitalism, white supremacy. I mean, the list goes on. On both sides, speaking in the gender binary of men and women, people don't feel like they are being heard. And people are very angry on both sides. And we're all blaming each other. But the common enemy that all of us have is indeed the system. But more than that, we are all actively playing a role in the system as well. And the system cannot thrive and cannot exist without the political and dating gender wars. So who is to blame for all of this? Is it the algorithms? Is it the system itself and we have no control? Or is it the people? Are we actively pushing all of this forward ourselves?
So we're going to start us off with the political gender wars because this is kind of where we left off in the last episode, part 2 of the gender wars timeline. We talked about the election and the gender wars are kind of hitting mainstream because of all this political talk, right? And there's been a lot of conversations about how women are getting more and more liberal and young men are getting more and more conservative. So according to a study that we found over the past 4 years, about 4 in 10 young women between the ages of 18 to 29 have described their political views as liberal, compared with 2 decades ago, which was 3 in 10. So they're going up, they're becoming more liberal more quickly. And if we look at this graph right here, we can see women is the green line and men is the dark blue line. We're looking at 18 to 29. Those are kind of the ages that we're focusing on. So yeah, the women are skyrocketing into the liberal and the men are slightly moving down into the conservative. And we think, just like a lot of people in the news, that a lot of this has to do with how men and women are viewing their rights being advocated in the political sphere, right? So because of this, we asked you guys, do you think culture celebrates femininity and do you think culture celebrates masculinity? Because each side kind of thinks that the other side celebrates the other one more. So on the femininity side, 38% of you guys said yes, it does, and 62% said no. But then on the masculinity side, we have a 74% said yes and 26% said no. So overwhelmingly, by the polls, we know that culture predominantly celebrates masculinity more than femininity.
And I just think it's because we've talked about this, what is femininity really and what is masculinity really? Because I think we all know the societal definitions of both of those things. And I definitely do think society parades men for being strong, macho, whatever. That's kind of the stereotype there. And femininity is more nurturing, soft, girly, whatever. But do I think that our culture and society promotes true, authentic femininity and masculinity? Absolutely not. I really don't. Because femininity and masculinity, I think, is unique to the person that's expressing and feeling those things. I think with talking about our timeline, when it comes to trans people, non-binary people, it's we kind of learned as a culture that, well, no, just because you're a man doesn't mean you feel very masc. You could actually feel very femme and be in your feminine energy. Right. So I think that helped to show people, no, it's not so much of a binary. But even still, I think that we all need to realize that femininity and masculinity is different for each person and what they feel that means for them based on their other intersecting identities as well.
Right, because femininity, we've talked about in the past, a lot of people think of men as protectors and everything, but when you look at how women, cis women, once they have babies and stuff like that, oxytocin literally makes them more protective over their children and everything. So it's what are we really looking at as traditional femininity and masculinity? But the other thing that I thought is interesting about this question is the word celebrates, because I don't necessarily, and it's also, again, what is the definition of femininity and masculinity? Because I think our culture celebrates toxic masculinity,
Right.
definitely. But I don't think we celebrate like, you know, heroic masculinity or positive masculinity. And same with femininity. Like, I think our culture celebrates the idea of femininity as like women serving and that sort of thing. And like, but not on the other side of like women's like power and everything like that. And one quick thing before we move to the next poll, like I did listen to this podcast, I forgot the name of it, when we were researching this episode, and they were talking about how maybe the gender wars have to do with how so much of mainstream culture in the past couple years, like we did in the timeline, was surrounded around women and femininity, like the Barbie movie and like Just a Girl, like all of those trends. But it's still like, I don't think we're centering in celebrating femininity. I think it's still just like it's catching up to masculinity. You know what I'm saying?
I think so too. And I also think right now with celebrating femininity, quote unquote, it is a lot about like being a bad bitch and like reducing us to like just our looks kind of thing too. Yeah. Because I even think like when I was looking at the timeline and I was like, when did it kind of start that like women were like, I'm gonna like break out in this kind of like not crazy way, but I thought about like the Riot Girl era. Yeah. That was like maybe kind of the first
like the
time.
punk era, yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's when it started in music and art, because you had the Guerrilla Girls and everything like that. And then on the Black women's liberation stuff too, they had a lot of like music. Like even Nina Simone had been doing like songs and everything like that. So I think once it started to hit like the pop culture sphere of things, girl power and like empowerment took a whole different view.
Yeah, but I totally agree. I do want to touch on what you just said too. I think femininity has caught up in a lot of ways, or like it is catching up in like what society's definition of it. And like I do feel like even like rap culture, like female rap had a lot to do with that. Like a lot of like summers of like these absolute like badass women, and it just like they keep coming like, and now it's like
even watching Rhythm and Flow, which I haven't watched the new episodes
spoilers,
yet, but like,
guys,
I'm like sorry, but all the girls were fucking killing it, and all the men I feel like there is this moment, and we see, you know, women graduating college more, like those statistics and everything, like women running social media in a lot of senses, like a lot of e-commerce, and even like, you know, women have so many more beauty products, like all of that, like has become because under capitalism, you know, because it's still, the patriarchy is oppressive and like encouraging women to like over consume and over commodify and like everything like that. Yes. But it has become a lot more centered around women, but not completely, because a lot of it's male gaze and, you know, all of that stuff.
Right. But we're getting there.
Yeah, we're getting there.
So another point in the argument is that both sides, meaning men and women, think that they are more oppressed. And even more than that, they think the other side is not oppressed at all. So we asked women, do you think men face oppression? And 38% said yes, and 62% said no. And then we asked men, do you think women face oppression? And an overwhelming 95% said yes, and 5% said no. And I just have to say, like, I do, and I still do, I have and I still do, like, struggle with that. Like, it feels better to me to be like, men are affected by patriarchy. Yeah. But, like, men are oppressed. It's like.
Yeah, oppressed is, like, a strong word. But, like the concept of like a prison of their own masculinity and like the psychological patriarchy that Terrence Real talks about, which we're going to get into later in this episode. It's like, I do think that they're oppressed. I mean, if we're going to play oppression Olympics, like 100% women are more oppressed. But like, if we're looking at men as a whole, and we're also considering Black and brown men, indigenous men, immigrant men, and like all of that, like the intersections, we can't just look at men as a group and be like, oh, they're not oppressed at all. Right. You know? So it's like totally. on the basis of gender, we always say men and think white men. Right. You know? So it's like, I think it is, I agree. It's hard to say like white men are oppressed. Like it's really difficult. But when we think about, you know, the patriarchy, they are affected and prisoned by their own.
Right. They are affected. But if you are a man with other identities, like being trans, immigrant, person of color, it's like, yes, that adds like a whole new layer to it, because it's like that is more prominent in our society. Like people see that first, kind of.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just a learning process, you know?
But it's interesting that, I mean, it makes sense from our following, right? That I think like the majority of men that follow us would say, yes, women are oppressed. Like 95% lines up. But like on the women's side, like how 38% said, only 38% said yes and 62% said no. And like, again, like I try not to look at who exactly is voting for what, but like I do a little skim, and I do think a lot of how that broke down was on the lines of race, because I did see a lot of white women voting, you know, no. And then a lot of like people of other colors and even other sexualities as well, because we got to think about like gay men and trans men and everything like that.
Yeah.
So it's like,
and that's so
intersectional
important.
life.
And like I will, even like for the purposes of this, like all white women, you know, like we're all the same. Like I will align myself with that, because
Same.
it's like I do, like your first thought like is like when you think about gender wars, it's like, who am I to be like mad at black men? Like that's not who I'm like mad at, you know?
Right.
But it's like men as a whole, and like white men are like maybe first in your mind with that, like as a white woman speaking for myself. So that's really interesting. And I don't think like I think it's important for us to look at the breakdowns of who voted who. We're not like outing anyone.
Yeah, we're not.
But I think that's even like better for us to really know, like as a society. It's like no one's at fault, but it's like, let's pay attention to that, because that is meaningful. That's not a coincidence that people with other identities voted that way, you know?
Yeah, and checking your biases, which is something we're going to talk about too when we get to like the algorithms, because it's like, it's not even something that I would necessarily always think about until I think I got into interracial relationships. And then it's like, okay, he's still being sexist as fuck, but he's not a white man, so it's different, you know?
Yeah.
So it's like, so yeah.
Yeah.
But next we asked men, do you guys consider yourselves to be a feminist? And actually 84% of men did, and only 16% did not, which is like a little bit surprising to me, especially because it seemed to become, in a lot of ways, I feel like there was a moment in maybe, I don't know, because I feel like when I was like in London around the Me Too time, like there were a good amount of men that were like, yes, I'm down for the cause. Like I am a feminist. Like I felt like more and more, but I felt like lately it's like less and less men are identifying with that. So like this made me feel better.
Yeah, and I think like, because feminism is like, it is such a like loaded word. I wish it wasn't.
Yeah.
But in like some ways it should be, because it like started with white feminism. It's like it has to be intersectional feminism, and then it has to be this thing and the other thing. Like feminism is not enough anymore.
Right.
Because it doesn't necessarily include everything, and like the TERF problem.
Yeah, like you could be a
TERF
feminist, a white feminist.
So
like,
it's not even enough. So I think you're right. Like I think for like during Me Too, men are like, yes, I'm a feminist, like blah blah blah. But now I think, and even women too, it's like people don't really want to identify with the specific word of feminist by itself. Yeah. And I don't think that's a bad thing, but like I wish that like we can like start a new definition that like does include everyone, and like everyone says intersectional, because it really is like the key to everything. Like that was like the number one problem. And then when Black queer feminists and Kimberly Crenshaw came up with that, like literally the most revolutionary thing in terms of our timeline that we talked about and everything we laid out, arguably in terms of feminism. And had we
stuck to that concept, I think we would have been a lot further than we are now. But capitalism, all of that. Yeah. Right. So we asked the men that do not consider themselves a feminist, why do you not consider yourself a feminist? And 50% said feminism does not include men's issues. None said feminists hate men. None said I'm not political. And 50% said we already have gender equality. And that lines up a lot with our timeline. Yeah. I think like men going down the men's rights activist thing, they were like, okay, like I'm for the feminist movement, but you guys keep ignoring us, which is like we said, it's like, I think we're at a point where it's crucial to include men. Otherwise, we're going to go down a very dark path. But at that time period, it was like, okay, well, you guys can organize, you know, as well. Like, we're playing the victim, like, a little too hard and, like, resting our weight on the shoulders of women. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, that kind of thing.
Like, the expectation of, like, emotional labor and, like, all of that from, like, women
to
and
be
like
saved by women and stuff. And it's like, you know, men had the power in society for so long, as we like looked at. So it's like they only were really woken up during like the civil rights movement, the gay rights movement, the feminist movement, etc. But they just kind of expect to hop on the bandwagon and then take up space
right
in the movement too.
And I would argue that like we can't have gender equality until we have like queer equality and like racial equality.
Yes, agreed.
You know, like I don't think that can exist without everything else too.
Yeah, because they're all so like in classism, like it's all so
Right.
this mush of like until we're all free, none of us are free. Like, you know? So yeah, and then we also asked you guys, do you think men's rights activists are the result / backlash of women getting more rights? And 73% of you guys said yes, and 27% said no. And I feel like this is like definitely a yes. Like looking at the timeline, it's like almost everything that happened was directly in opposition to like women making a step.
Yeah.
You know?
I agree. I think like, and I like struggled with this one a little bit, like before we did the timeline, like I wasn't quite sure. And like part of me was like,
same,
no, like
same.
men just fucking hate us. Like it doesn't even matter. Like they would be doing this shit anyway. So I think, yeah. But then I think like thinking about it now when like our like, bodies are like being oppressed more than ever. I'm like, we're like taking some steps forward, but at the end of the day, it's like, it's still really fucking bad. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's like anytime we would get like some change or some movement forward, it would be like, you know, men and other groups of privileged people, because white women as well, heterosexual people would be like, whoa, like this is too much. Let's bring it back to how it was, because now I feel like I have less power, when it's not even really like that. It's just becoming more of an even playing field.
How can we like how can we simultaneously as a society have the first Black, Indian, Jamaican woman president up for running and also elect Trump in that same year? You know what I mean? It's like,
and that just shows we haven't come like far enough at all.
At all. In fact, it's going like this. People
and
are
a
going
lot of
up
people
and
said that too, because a lot of people were, you know, even on the Democratic side, and liberal people and leftists were like looking at Kamala Harris's campaign and being like, look, like you centered your whole thing around abortion rights, and that's just not where we are yet. Like I saw this TikTok the other day that I thought was really like powerful and important, and it's like, unfortunately, like we'd like to think, because we've made great waves in feminism and women are becoming more liberal, that, you know, that's gonna make a difference. But it's still like, what, 4 in 10 women? It's not even all women that are on the same side of that conversation. Like you have to factor in the class stuff, the race stuff. I mean, race, it's like, you know, most people of color voted for, except Latinos, not Latinos. So like, you know what I'm saying? Like there were so many other like economic issues, not that Trump was going to solve them better, but just more about Kamala Harris's campaign. Like even Bernie Sanders was like, you're not speaking to the working class and all of that stuff. Like I think we have a false sense sometimes, because of the popular culture and like commercialism and like all of that, like how far we really are. Because like the culture might be further and like people's ideas to a point, but then when it comes down to like actual like bills, laws, and your fucking
like
taxes,
numbers,
people are like, I only care about myself.
Right. And that's on capitalism, individualism in our society.
And a lack of like education and media literacy.
Yeah. All of those things.
Yeah, all of those things.
So someone submitted a listener story to this question and said, if men's rights activist is backlash from women's rights, it proves they are extremists and not fighters for liberty. Which I do agree with. I'm like, why did it have to happen after that, though? Yeah. And I feel like that's the same thing with, like, the history we talked about, where it's like, all of a sudden, men were like, wait, like, why aren't we included? It's like,
and that's why it's like, part of it isn't even backlash, because part of it, I want to say, is an awakening, because men were in the second wave of feminism realizing how their gender roles were hurting them as well. And they were like, oh, we don't want this. So they were like enlightened by women. But then instead of like moving forward with it in a positive direction, like they were for a little bit, it turned into like backlash and like, oh, well, you don't care about us, you know? Like,
I totally agree. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like that's missing the whole fucking point. You know? The next question we asked women was, do you support men's rights? And 79% said yes, and 21% said no. I'm not going to lie, these polls were out before we did the timeline, and Fiji was the one who created the timeline. So I was like not as knowledgeable, and like I was thinking like men's rights activism and like the bad shit. So I did vote no. I'm changing my answer to yes. I do care about men's rights. I do care about, you know, the prison industrial complex and like father rights and all loneliness and like depression, suicide rates. Like I
the
do,
military, like
and
the
that
disposability,
and that they're oppressed by patriarchy. That like they do fall victim to the patriarchy as well in other ways that are not talked about as much. Like being like from a young boy, I can't talk about my feelings. Like that is extremely detrimental. And so, yeah, I'm changing my answer to yes, but I'm no liar. Like, I did vote no. And, like, I know you probably saw that shit. So
I think I voted, I don't remember seeing yours, but I voted yes. I support. I'm surprised it's this high for women saying yes. But I think the intersectionality thing, like, goes into there, too. But it's like, yeah, I think the right feminism, like, always did support men's rights. But men's rights has gotten such a dirty name because of men's rights activists and MRA and like all of that stuff. And like, I'm in the same way feminism has. I mean, I think men's rights activists are worse, but like,
and even in Me Too, like the original creator, and I'm so sorry, I forget her name.
Tarana Burke.
Of the Me Too movement, it was supposed to include men as well. And then it turned into whitewashed pink pussy hats.
Yeah.
So, you know?
Tarana Burke.
Tarana Burke. Got it.
So we asked you guys, what is the most pressing men's issue? And 52% of you guys said the prison system. 12% said divorce court / father's rights. 33% said the male loneliness epidemic. And 3% said the military men are disposable. And I think I put the prison system too, because the prison system is literally modern slavery. Like, you know, and it affects women as well. It just disproportionately affects men, and particularly black men. But I think all of these are important issues, you know?
Agreed. I voted for prison system too, and that's just on the intersectionality. It's like black men are oppressed more, and like this is like fucking huge, and it's been a huge problem forever. Like arguably since the prison industry was even originated.
And it's so interesting because when we watched the Red Pill documentary and they talked about the prison system and how many men are like sent to prison, they completely skipped over anything about race.
Right.
And it's like, you know, had you guys like organized a community that was more, you know, and we see it much more diverse now in its different sectors. But like, had they started that back then, similar to white feminism, I think we would have made so much more progress on like the key actual issues.
And I do think in terms of the dating gender wars, the men being disposable thing is like really bad too, because it's like using men for money, like for sex,
a success
and like
object,
not giving a fuck about their feelings because they don't know how to properly communicate them, and so it's like they don't matter. Like I do think men being disposable in terms of dating like is a huge problem, but like ultimately, the prison system does outweigh that. But they're all
because that's part of it. Like the prison system acts like men are disposable. So it's like they're all like, you know,
interconnected.
Yeah, interconnected. And then the last one that we asked you guys before we get into algorithms is, what is the most pressing women's issue? And 63% of you guys said sexual and domestic abuse, 24% said abortion, 10% said beauty standards and over-sexualization, and 3% said equal pay. And I feel like this lines up because equal pay has come a long way. It's still not where it's supposed to be, but it's come a lot farther. The sexual and domestic abuse, like this is like, I was surprised. I thought people would say abortion, and like, I don't know, like, because I've been directly affected by this, and like, I don't know. So maybe I just like, I see it as such an issue, but I feel like because I've been through it, and I haven't completely like overcome it. I mean, it leaves like lasting impacts on your life, but like that is one that is very political, but it's also very connected to dating as well, because it directly impacts your ability to get into healthier relationships after this. And, you know, I mean, domestic abuse and sexual abuse was also listed on the men's issues, but like, I feel like it disproportionately definitely affects women.
Yeah, I was like really proud to see that, honestly, because I thought people were going to vote for abortion. Like that's happening like literally right now, and like,
Yeah.
you know, everything's happening right now, but something huge with abortion is currently happening.
Yeah.
But I was really proud to see that, and like, I completely agree. Like, I think at the end of the day, it's like, you know, I haven't been in an abusive relationship. Like, I haven't been sexually abused at all. So it's like,
You've experienced sexual like harass, and I think that's one
Right,
of the things
but
with the
that's-
sexual stuff. It's that it's so widespread.
Yeah, I
you
think
know?
that's in there too. Like, exactly, like, even if you haven't experienced it, like, you do feel that impact as being a woman. Like, we're extra afraid that that's going to happen to us.
Right.
Everyone definitely knows someone, if not multiple people, that it's happened to in your
Right.
family and otherwise. So it's like, I do think that that's something that is kind of the most impactful. I think everything is. I think the beauty standards, it's like, it's just been here fucking forever. I do think it is changing a little bit, like, especially with people being more knowledgeable about what fat phobia is and like body neutrality. And again, I'm probably just in an echo chamber. Like, at the end of the day, not as many people are
Right.
actually embracing that. But yeah, I was proud to see that. I was happy to see that.
Yeah, same.
So now we're going to get into algorithms. Should we blame algorithms? While we were going over the timeline, we noticed a lot of people are affected by the algorithms that they are in and easily influenced by the algorithms. And this especially started with the World Wide Web and the rise of the internet, influencer culture, manosphere, men are trash culture, and all of these things. So we asked the men that listen to So Wet, So Dry, what type of content do you consume the most? And an overwhelming 59% said self-improvement. And we're going to break down what that really means in a second. 24% said sex and relationships. Hey, that's us. 17% said financial growth. And I'm honestly shook that financial growth wasn't because I feel
Ahead
like
of sex and relationships.
what?
You know?
I know, but I'm like, the manosphere is sex and relationships.
Yeah.
I mean, the manosphere is all of these things.
Yeah.
Essentially.
They're all pipelines leading to it.
Right. But when we were planning this episode and talking about how self-improvement is one of the main systems within the manosphere, it's what really is self-improvement, because they're not helping each other how to feel or how to communicate or how to realize they're not disposable and they are worthy and things like that. The self-improvement is this is how you control women, get money, get what you want, get happiness. That
and
is
but it starts usually because it might start with a good intention, a man is feeling particularly sad or maybe went through a breakup or wants to get more money or whatever, is looking for self-improvement, atomic habits, 48 laws of power, something, and then ends up spiraling down the stream of manosphere.
No, because when my ex, when I was with him, he was literally reading Atomic Habits, and I remember telling you about
I read
it,
that book too, though.
and he's but it's fine. It's not about that, but it's just men really do want that self-improvement shit, because it's I feel self-care and things like that, how it's advertised online, taking a bubble bath and doing your skincare, it's if they don't want to do that, it's is this their self-care, that they're yearning for?
Yeah, because men's self-improvement is different, I think, than what, because I think the others go into it, right? Self-improvement encompasses mental health, financial improvement, sex and relationships, because the whole idea is that once you get better, everything else. And I think it also has to do with the individualistic times that we live in as well. Everybody's focused on themselves and improving themselves too.
Yeah.
Because I was thinking too, with this one, and I'll read the women's one, or you can in a second, but because they're similar. Women voted mostly for self-improvement too. But self-improvement could also encompass beauty and fitness and stuff too, because maybe we should have added that one also, because looks maxing and because there's the self-improvement, there's so many different types of self-improvement, but it does seem kind of like a dirty word to us after doing the timeline.
Yeah, and I don't want it to be. And
right.
I feel a lot of women want self-help books and things like that, and Drew Afawalo even advertises her book as a self-help book in terms of understanding
loving yourself.
Yeah, because I think self-help and improvement, for both men and women, is how to like maybe like be a better partner, like how to get the guy, how to get the girl,
Right.
like how to like not understand or how to unlearn internalized misogyny or like internalize things.
Yes.
Like I think there's a lot of positives and negatives with both on both sides.
Yes. Yeah.
But yeah, we asked women what type of content do you consume the most and gave women the same options. Self-improvement won with 68%, 27% said sex and relationships, and 5% said financial growth, which I feel like the financial growth thing for women like maybe makes a little bit more sense, but at the same time, like I do feel like everyone you ever speak to, it's like money, 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 and like
In the city more though, I feel
Yeah,
like.
okay,
You
yeah,
know what
you're
I'm
right,
saying? Like
right,
in
right,
the suburbs and stuff, I feel like it's less like people get like one job that they stay in or like the same career that they stay in. Like in the city, I feel like it is much more like you're an entrepreneur.
because you're like
trying to
dying. Yeah.
Right, exactly, because you can't afford anything. But like, yeah, women's self-improvement is actually higher than men's, and like sex and relationships is like slightly higher as well. It's just like no one was really for financial growth. But I wonder if like the self-improvement, because now I'm thinking we probably should have put like beauty and fitness and like the
But I think
the
that
physical,
goes into
but it goes
it.
into it. Yeah,
I think
'cause-
it goes into it. And it's like, yeah, it's hard because it's like we never know like how people are going to interpret certain things. But I think that's okay. And like, I really do feel like self-improvement for women, like the makeup trend, what's wrong with my face? Like
Right,
looking at me,
right.
like what hair color would I look best with? It's like, that is like arguably self-improvement for like a lot of women, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's super interesting that it won for both of those polls. I wasn't expecting that. I don't think it's a bad thing. It's just
Yeah,
interesting.
I think it just also it shows the individualistic culture, which is like it's important to improve yourself before you get into a relationship with other people.
Yeah.
But I think our culture more and more is focused on themselves and less about like building community, building relationships, like
Agreed.
all of that stuff,
and that
too.
is evidence in how polarized we are right now.
Right.
Everyone.
Yeah. Okay, so now we're going to get into algorithms a little bit because, you know, we on this podcast in the past have blamed things on algorithms. Like, we're learning throughout
Still do.
doing this. Yeah, we still do a lot, but, like, I don't know. Like, I feel like, I had a light bulb moment when I was, like, researching this and, like, read this article, and I'm like, is this not the same as, like, the whole children conversation? Like, oh, what about the children? Like, whatever. So we're going to see what some studies had to say. So one study by the University College of London and University College of Kent, they were concerned about the impact of social media on young people. And they did research that found that young men from Gen Z, many of whom revere social media influencer Andrew Tate, are more likely than baby boomers to believe that feminism has done more harm than good. So essentially, they interviewed a bunch of young people engaging with and producing radical content online to help create a number of archetypes of teenage boys who might be vulnerable to becoming radicalized. So they had these little like profiles, and then they set up accounts on TikTok for each archetype with specific interests. They might be seeking content on masculinity or loneliness or something, you know, more wholesome, like we talked about, like maybe self-improvement, something like that. And they watched 1,000 videos that TikTok suggested on its For You page over 7 days. So the initial content was in line with the stated interests of each archetype. But after 5 days of research, the TikTok algorithm presented 4 times as many videos with misogynistic content, including objectification, sexual harassment, or discrediting women, which increased from 13% of recommended videos to 56%. In only 7 days, 1,000 videos, which I'm like, I wonder how many videos I scroll through when I'm scrolling, because it's a lot of fucking videos. And then one of the researchers said algorithmic processes on TikTok and other social media sites target people's vulnerabilities, such as loneliness or feelings of loss of control, and gamify harmful content. As young people microdose on topics like self-harm or extremism, to them it feels like entertainment. So then it goes on to talk about how the UK passed this Online Safety Act to kind of like crack down on censoring this type of content to avoid, you know, extremifying men, if that's even the right word. But I didn't feel like this was like completely like the right solution, because I'm like, okay, but then how does that make sense for the people that are creating the content and the broader culture? And like, is it the algorithm? Whatever. So we have a lot of articles like this one that's, again, like blaming the algorithm for driving men and women apart. And I was kind of thinking this, right? Because this one article was saying, like, you know, teenage girls are more likely to be recommended like singers, songs, makeup, and boys might see like stabbing, knifing content, sometimes sexual content. Like, and it starts with those like main interests that are on the lines of like femininity, masculinity, and then breaks down.
Yeah.
And they're saying like, while TikTok is not transparent about how its algorithm works, like they say that they don't encourage that, and they have a bunch of people behind the scenes that are like filtering this content, censoring it, whatever. Like, we can't really be sure, so part of it like might be TikTok's fault. They're blaming TikTok. But this other article that I found talks about the problem with blaming algorithms. And this was like so interesting to me, guys. So I hope it's as interesting.
It was eye-opening.
It really was. But so they were essentially talking about Amazon had created this AI platform with an algorithm that was used for HR purposes, used for hiring purposes to streamline the process. And then when they built this and they used it, it turned out to be sexist as fuck. So essentially, Amazon threw out the AI HR tool. They were like, it's sexist, fuck the tool, we don't want to use that, we're gonna keep doing what we've been doing. But the problem with this is that the tool, the AI, was trained on all of Amazon's past hiring practices. So the tool is a reflection and is a mirror of Amazon as a company itself. It's not that the AI is manipulating things to become sexist. It's that like the culture of the company was sexist and it manifested in this AI platform.
They really fucked up. Like they really fucking showed their ass.
They were like, oh shit, we're showing our ass, whatever. So it's essentially saying, and there was this talk from this professor, I think he was from like BU University. I watched his YouTube video, and he was explaining how like these tools, these AI tools, these platforms, which I know like so often we want to blame tech and we're like, oh my God, it's going to ruin society and like all this stuff. So I felt a weird way about this, right? Because I'm like, I'm so used to blaming tech for a lot of stuff. Yeah. But he's saying that because people don't see their own biases, like they have blind spots, and they actually did this research study where they showed different profiles of like Lyft drivers, and we're essentially like having them rate them on all this stuff. And then if they looked at other people's ratings, they were like, oh, that person is racist. Like their ratings are racist, like if they were asked. But if they look at their own with the same ratings, they think that they're not being racist because they have like bias. But then if they were told in the study, when you look at your ratings, pay attention to race, would you change your answers? They were oh, I would. So he's essentially saying that like these tools will reflect back to you your biases and your racism and your sexism, and that we should use that as a tool to like lift off of and be able to change things instead of just being like, oh no, the tool's the problem. Yeah. And then keep doing what we're doing.
Yeah, because it's kind of like making our blind spots like even stronger when we're like blaming the tool and we're not like reflecting on like what's actually going on in our minds. It's just like, oh, it's the stupid algorithm. But it's like we create the algorithm, the society creates the algorithm. And I just think that Amazon example is like so perfect, and like especially like in bigger conversations about AI is like it does mimic real society the same way algorithms mimic real society and content online mimics real society. So it's not like, oh, with the rise of social media everything got worse. It's like, no, the rise of social media has it directly in our face now of what's going on. Before, we didn't have that. You just have real life experiences. But now with all this content, like mimicking people's actual like feelings about gender wars and all these things, it's like in your fucking face more. And so we think it's so much worse and all these things. But really, this is like a tool that we can use to be better.
Yeah, because it's like everything that exists is the product of like what has come before it and all of that stuff. So if we're living under patriarchy and a boy is experiencing loneliness or something like that, a lot of the content creators are looking to solve that problem under a patriarchal system. So their solution is you need to make more money, you need to get more bitches, you need to be hotter. This is the type of content I'm going to give you. And then it like keeps spiraling down a path. Right. So it's like, in my mind, that's more the the importance of like creating content against patriarchy and against those like biases and that like structure, because especially as we're moving into an AI world where AI is trained on all of the content that is out there, unless we fill those gaps, because a lot of people just go to ChatGPT and they're like, what is the truth, right? And if we're taking ChatGPT as truth, it is pulling what is the predominant narrative. So unless you have other things that are counter to that narrative, we're rewriting history and we're continuing to ignore truth.
And blaming AI for just like being representative of like what we fucking are.
Right.
Already.
Exactly.
Wow.
And Bell Hooks is a great voice on this. We watched this interview with Bell Hooks where she went on this show called Speak Freely, which is all about the First Amendment right and the freedom of speech, which is really interesting because right now conservatives are kind of co-opting the use of free speech to be like, I don't need to be politically correct and all of those things. But I think the left, we really need to pay attention to the importance of the freedom of speech as well because of how things are manipulated. So let's take what she says and put it into the context of the algorithms and everything.
I'm curious about your take about the marketplace of ideas. Speaking Freely is about all those ideas floating around and the need to hear all of them and to share viewpoints. And yet it seems that in recent years, especially on college campuses, we've seen a different take on freedom of speech. I know that you teach, you see college students up close. Do they have the same feel for freedom of speech that you may have had when you were going to school?
Well, I think that the key word that you used, Ken, was the marketplace. And I think what's really tragic about education, particularly at a higher level in our nation right now, is that it has become to be something that is about the marketplace, so that there's a lot of repression that students begin to do because they want to prepare themselves for the marketplace, for getting the money and getting the power and getting the status and getting the fame. And that means that you can't always say what you want to say.
You have not hesitated to question projects, programs, or individuals that frankly a lot of the African American community embrace with pride. You've raised questions about Kwanzaa, the Million Man March, and not least of all Oprah. Is it difficult to speak out on those topics?
I think, it's difficult when you're misunderstood, It's difficult when people stand up and say, why do you hate Spike Lee so much? And I say, actually there are moments in Spike Lee's films that I think are incredible, that I love. But that doesn't mean that I don't have a real critical commentary about his work. And I know that as a teacher, I'm constantly encouraging my students to recognize the difference between a critical commentary about something that can illuminate it for you, that can help you to see it in a different way, and something that's just trashing. If you think about all the work that's been done by Cecil Bach and others about how as a nation we're lying more and more, I think we have to connect that to an absence of free speech, because when you live in a country that makes truth something that is associated with the painful, that should not be spoken, it becomes hard to get people to value speaking freely. Because there are things that we have to say that will be wounding. Like, for example, in my latest book that I'm talking to you about Black people and self-esteem, there are things that I have to say about Black children and how they're parented that would sound harsh to a lot of people. But those things have to be said if we're going to address in any way what is happening overall collectively with Black children and self-esteem. So to me, a lot of what I do in the classroom is to try to teach that kind of courage that allows you to speak freely. And I think, again, things that are not seen as topical, clever, witty in a shallow sense, we often don't hear. And I don't want to just talk about bell hooks. I think dissident speech is not valued in our nation, whether it comes from white men, rich white men or poor white men. I think the real issue is we are in danger as a nation of silencing any form of speech that goes against what is perceived to be the status quo.
If in your classroom, your students came to you and said, there's a Nazi coming to campus to speak, he's clearly a racist. There's no question about it. And a local organization decided to recruit them to recruit this individual to stir things up, and they want to enlist you to fight the appearance. What's your take on that? Well, how do you respond?
You know, my response is always on behalf of free speech, because basically I always tell my students, if you look at the history of, silencing, ultimately the people that get silenced are the dissident radical voices, that anytime we try to shut down people, it in fact ends up being something that causes us to suffer more. I think that people need to know how to hear information and think critically about it. Not to, and that's usually my whole thing, is to say, what does it mean for us to hear something that we have to think critically about and that we can make a choice about, as opposed to the idea that we should eliminate people saying certain things, people thinking certain things, take certain books out of the library. Well, let's talk about those books. Let's talk about those ideas. All you have to do to silence someone is to say they're politically incorrect. And frequently it's a tool that conservatives use to silence or belittle the voices of liberal and radical people.
So the first part of things where she's talking about her students and like repression and the marketplace of ideas and how they repress their imagination, like preparing themselves for the marketplace. Like this makes me think of the context of capitalism, right? Like everyone is trying to self-improve and like kind of get the next step up. So like everything is falling like under capitalism. And then the second thing, like she says throughout this interview, like she is a dissenting voice. Like during this time period, like she is someone that is asking why, like asking questions, thinking critically, like countering the truths that America holds to be true. Like as we still see, that we don't have a toxic history of slavery, that there is no race problem in America, that there is no gender problem, all of those things. And that we're like consistently, lying as a nation because the truth is associated with the painful, similar to like the Amazon stuff, right? Where it's like, okay, we have this reflected to us in the form of this tool. And same on TikTok, we see the gender like hate and like patriarchy's effects playing out in real time, with men becoming radicalized and women becoming radicalized in a lot of senses too. And instead of like asking why that's happening and looking at the greater system of the patriarchy and of our culture, we're trying to do the quick fix of silencing all the speech, of censoring everything. But the problem, even, and I know it's like crazy to think about, right? Because it's like, why would we ever advocate for not censoring Andrew Tate, right? Like, and how he asked her, like, what would you say about like Nazis going on campus? Her argument essentially is that if you censor them, it's only going to come back. And usually who is at the brunt of most of the censoring is the radical activist voices that are speaking against, our history of racism, sexism, and all of that, like in America. And so it's like these voices and this content and all of that is the product of the broader culture. And so like you can't, free speech, you can't censor anything really, because it censors all of it, and usually it falls hardest on their backs. It's this paradox of things really. And like I love how she, back in this time period, she's still advocating for like nuance, thinking critically, media literacy, and how these things need to be taught in schools. Because it's like when you see a piece of content, there is a reason that your impulse is rage, or your impulse is like connection, or your impulse is this is right. But like taking that step back, thinking critically, drawing connections, and like moving the conversation forward is something that so many of us have lost even more in the age of social media and like all of those things. But like she's essentially saying the solution is not to censor it. The solution is to keep raising questions and create more content, like raise more voices.
And I don't think I could have came to that on my own ever. And I think that this was so eye-opening, like this whole interview. Yeah. And like, although like it is like hard for me to understand sometimes, because like Bell Hooks is like really fucking smart. And just like, you know what I mean? But it's so important. And I think like a lot of people wouldn't come to that conclusion either. Cause like what you said, like how can you justify like not wanting to censor Andrew Tate? But it's like,
right,
how horrible that he was, and like all of the like assault aside and all of those things, it's like he did show us, again, like that mirror of like what's actually going on and like how easily young men and like we are manipulated by algorithms and content and all of those things. But it is a mirror of like people's actual feelings. And it's so true. Like it will come back around. Like you want to just, and not even just Andrew Tate, it's like people in our lives. Like if they have a difference of opinion, you just walk away. Like you don't engage. And like we learned that through this election too, that like we need to have more conversations like with white women. And I think like thinking critically like is like, it's a privilege to not do that in a sense. But like when we're talking about algorithms too, it's like with just silencing and being like, I'm not going to think about this. This is so scary. I don't want to think about this. It's like we are like robbing ourselves like of that opportunity to really think things critically and revolutionize and like understand that like it's not like, yes, the system is controlling us, but we are agents of change. Like every single one of us, like walking around, like we ultimately like could have more power than the system, like if we chose to do so. Yeah. But yeah, it's like we're just so polarized right now and no one's listening to each other. And yeah.
Yeah. And like two things like that you said out of that, like one with the Andrew Tate thing, it's like, and the Nazis too, like the thing is not censoring them, but it's also like Andrew Tate is a rapist. Like he's a scam artist. Like there are other ways to hold him accountable legally that are like wrong. And that should still be done. It's not like Andrew Tate is his own free thinker and just keep him out in the world, like whatever. Like you should still be held accountable for that stuff. But the marketplace of ideas, as they're talking about, like I think a lot of what's going on right now, and even the ban with TikTok, when you look at it, it's like people are able to access different voices, new content, more education, and that scares the greater system, right? Because the more that you are educated about these things, as much as you can be victimized as well by cult leaders like Andrew Tate and even to a point like Shira 7 or something like that, like who are very, you know, charismatic and kind of like hit on your pain spots and your vulnerabilities. Again, like they can be held accountable for scam artistry, cult, like whatever. But it's like TikTok, in a lot of senses, I still go back to the idea that it is a great thing for us to have so much content and so much media and so much education. And like when you look at it's about to be banned, the defunding the Department of Education, like media literacy and like having, you know, nuanced conversations, reading things critically, like all of that stuff is just more the case for like more education, which is something that was never valued in our society because that is what keeps us under capitalism, right? Like we are taught to be workers and we're not taught to be like thinkers or like dismantle the system. Like the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. Like, you know what I'm saying? So it's like, we need to go back to a time or discover a time because it never really was that. Like all the things that we hold true. Yeah. It's about thinking critically, starting conversations, not censoring everything, not blaming the tool, blah, blah, blah.
And we have the power to like make that choice. Like nothing is just laid out and this is how we're supposed to think about it. It's like if we were more so like conditioned to be thinkers instead of like workers, it's like maybe we would like have an easier time with all of this because it's not easy. Like it's hard. But again, I do think it's like a privilege to a certain extent to not do it.
Right.
So we talked about algorithms and now this kind of leads us into how should we be hating men as much as we do as women right now? Thinking about the men are trash era and things like that and where we've gotten today. Should we blame men? Are men the problem? You know, so this TikTok kind of captures that perfectly.
Look, I'm just going to say it. Ladies, please stop. And I mean, for the love of God, please stop making videos where you're shitting on men. Like, there's nothing cute about that. There's nothing empowering about degrading an entire gender because of one or two guys that may have hurt you in the past. Like, we literally have an entire system that is trying to control us and instill fear into us. And you are out here creating a gender war. Like, we have bigger fish to fry. And I mean, if you look in my comments, you will see hundreds of comments coming through from men that are just upset and they're hurt. And you're literally doing to them what you accuse them of doing to you. And it just creates this cycle. and it's toxic, and it's not helping anybody. So please do yourself a favor and just stop.
So yeah, and this is like, not to say that the feminism side of things is like as bad as the men's side of things, but this is a big thing on the women's algorithms, how things have gotten more and more extreme, more and more intense. All men should die, men are worth nothing, like da-da-da-da. And it's not everybody, but that narrative is like growing.
Right. But if it's not everybody, it's arguably everybody does kind of say it as a joke. Maybe not, no, still not everybody.
And is it a joke though? Because
is it a joke or not? Exactly. And I think even if it started as a joke, at this point, if it's like the first thing that rolls off your tongue, like, and even to this day, I'll still catch myself like really generalizing and being like, oh, like men, like I can't. But like, and it's like cute, quirky, whatever. But like, I just don't think it's cute anymore. I just think like, and that's on like wanting to actually like be an intersectional feminist, you know, because before it's like I said I did, but it's like I didn't really, because like intersectionality like does include men and like men of color and like all of that. So I'm like, I don't want to do that anymore. Like, do a lot of men like suck? Like, I still think they do, but I'm like, just like learning to like take it away from like each individual men and like men who've hurt me, men who've hurt you, like all of those things. It's like men as a whole, they don't suck, you know?
Yeah, and using those generalized statements, because it's the same thing as like we said before with like fucking Andrew Tate and the Nazi stuff. It's like, we don't want to say women don't have the right to create that content. They have every right to create that content and still will and still can and all of that. And that is a sector of feminism. But if we want to be pushing things forward from like, you know, grounded in intersectional feminism, grounded in bell hooks and like those feminist texts, like we should be critiquing that. And sometimes I think a lot of women like ourselves are afraid to say, well, what about this? Because it makes you seem like a pick-me or not a girl's girl and everything like that. And if we are afraid of saying that, I think that even further highlights the problem, you know?
That's like what Bell Hooks was saying too. It's like, we can make the choice about something. Yes, men are trash and all of that is going on, but it's like, rather than just like hopping on it and like being like, oh, this is a quick fix, this is giving me dopamine, because like, fuck men, and it might feel so good in the moment. I know it did for me. It like literally changed my life. I was like, fuck y'all. But like, if I had like sat back and like thought critically about that, and again, I do think it's a privilege to not do that.
Right.
Like, maybe it would have been different, because like thinking critically now, I'm like, well, I don't want hatred in my body. Like, I don't want that anymore. Because it, like, nearly, like, fucking killed me. Like, I don't want to do that anymore. Yeah. So, like, I want to think critically about, like, yes, there's a lot of bad shit going on. But, guys, it's bad shit going on both sides. Is, like, women doing it to the degree of, like, the Andrew Tate red pill? No. But, like, if
but
you
it doesn't
think
even
critically
matter
about it, it balances each other out. And the two cannot exist without one another, you know?
And we're going to war. We literally calling it a gender war, where it's like, and it's like, them aside, like you said, like it doesn't feel good within yourself, and like it doesn't serve you to hold all this hatred. Like we're gonna get into the effects of like heartbreak and loneliness and how like that is like a source of a lot of what is like happening right now. But it's like important for, honestly, like, not to stroke our own fucking dicks, rub our own clits, but like voices like ours, and I hope you guys too that are listening, to like, when people are making general statements or when you see a piece of content, like think critically about it and don't just like be silent in those situations, because I know it's like, especially nowadays with cancel culture and like, you know, you're afraid of not seeming woke enough, or like people are gonna, anything that you say, people might think like, oh, I'm associating that with this. Like oh, if they're advocating for men, they must be conservative, all of that stuff. But like, that is like how Bell Hooks said, like, she's been a dissenting voice and she criticized Oprah, she criticized Spike Lee, but she was like, it's not real progress unless I do that, because like that must happen. Feminism would not have like accelerated had it not been for Black feminists being like, hey, where are we in this conversation? Lesbians being like, where are we in this conversation? You know, like we have to push it forward.
And it's like more so than ever, it's like we're afraid to be called pick-me's. It's like, pick-me and the idea of a pick-me is so misogynistic. And the fact that like people don't see that is just like wild to me. And I didn't see it at first necessarily. Like, I always knew it was kind of like not really the wave, like deep down.
We used to say it on the pod, like
right.
we evolved a lot.
But I was like, fuck it. Yeah.
Because like I think it's like funny if you're like, oh my god, am I being like a pick me? Like
about
you know,
yourself.
There's different senses.
Yeah.
But in like certain people, like I would say, what's her face that just pearly things.
Yeah.
Like someone like that is like, you know, they are completely like co-opting their thing to degrade themselves and like join these voices that are like whatever. But it's like, if you are just simply standing in your truth where you respect yourself, you respect feminism, you want to advocate for other women, and all of your intentions are in the right place of pushing feminism forward.
Yeah.
For you to bring a man's issue into it or advocate for not all men, like whatever, like not all men sounds like a crazy fucking statement, but like we're in 2025, we're about to be in 2025. Things are different than 2016. Like we need to progress.
Yeah.
You know?
And last thing, like with what you said about like people say one thing and then you associate it with something else, like, oh, they're definitely conservative. It's like, that's just polarizing us more. And that's on not thinking critically, because it's like, oh, you just rule someone off so quickly. And I know I'm so guilty of it. Like,
same.
Especially as white women, but like even just in general too, it's like, we don't realize like the agent of change that's within us, like the knowledge we have, the intuition we feel when viewing these sorts of content, but we're just like being like, we don't want to be the mindless scroller mouth breathers that people think we are with
iPad
social media.
Yeah.
It is a tool that we can use, but we're not using it as a tool. So that's why it feels like that's what's to blame.
Yep.
But yeah, and Bell Hooks talks about this whole idea, and like, I don't know if you want me to keep this in the episode, but I've like felt like certainly I'm like, well, I don't know. Like sometimes you do, or I'll speak in I statements. Like I do need to hear from like a Black queer feminist to like tell me what's right. Yeah. And like, not like go up to someone and ask, but it's like, look at history, like look at people like Bell Hooks and like what Bell Hooks says about if we should hate men or not.
And I think that's valid because it's like, I mean, as white women who are like, you know, mostly femme, like heterosexual presenting, like all of that stuff, like I think it is important for us to question ourselves and be like, am I doing this? Am I thinking this from a basis of like white supremacy? Am I thinking of this, like look to other voices to challenge that, you know? But it is true. I feel like we all have that need for validation where we don't always trust our gut instincts that are dissenting, as Bell Hooks continues to say, against like the common narrative.
And last thing I'll say too, like even with this election, it's like a lot of white women on TikTok are like making videos like, what do you need as Black women? Like, what can we do? Like, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, they've already told us though. Yeah. So it's not like we need to go up to like people now. Like there's already so much here for us to learn from. Like, we don't need to ask, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like things are changing and all of that, but this is literally timeless. Like these types of texts and like Bell Hooks' words and wisdom, her books, this interview, like this is what we can go to. And even like LaRonda's essay, I forget her last name, but like an open letter to white feminists, like that's been out since 2016. Like
same exact thing.
That's what we need to go to. So yeah, let's watch the other snippet of this Bell Hooks interview.
I mean, I like the fact that gangster rappers used to have this phrase, come correct. And, you know, that's exactly what it meant. To come correct was to be mindful, to be respectful, to be aware of who you're speaking to. And that was the initial positive thrust of political correctness, which was to be mindful of who you're talking to. And I talk about this in Communion, the Female Search for Love, that women often will talk about men in an extraordinarily hateful way that is considered quite normal. But in fact, if men talk about women in that extraordinarily hateful way, we often get up in arms. And I think that all of those issues, to me, political correctness, simply said, be mindful of how you're talking about groups and be mindful of what you do and say. And what is really tragic is the way conservatives and right-wing forces have made political correctness something so negative that there's the kind of backlash now where people feel like, well, I shouldn't have to be mindful. You know, I shouldn't have to think about what I'm saying. And that's too bad, because I think, you know, the real freedom of democracy requires of all of us that kind of civility and courtesy, where we are mindful, where we think about what we say, because we live in a nation that is incredibly diverse, and yet our language is incredibly binary, incredibly either or, so that we really have to work to be inclusive. You know, when I'm talking about white people who are racist, I have to work to make sure that my language isn't bringing all white people into that, because I know that's not so. When I'm talking about men who are misogynist and patriarchal, I have to work to use a language that doesn't just make it seem like this is who all men are.
Fucking fire, bitch. And it's like,
I know.
That is like, it's almost like, now I'm thinking, duh. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, yes. And it's like, I did need that validation to an extent. And I do think it's because of like our timeline and like the men are trash and like how prominent that was and how like everything's so in our face and like all of these things. But it's like, yeah. And it's like what you said, it's like saying not all men is almost like a slur, like it's giving wrong side of history. And it's but it's true though. And like, even with the white people shit, like, it's like, well, all white people are inherently
all lives
racist
matter,
and
like whatever.
Yeah, so it's like you don't want to feel like like that.
And sometimes it's not the time. Like, you know, like all lives matter was not the time during Black Lives Matter. Like that was not like that
Not
was
funny.
direct
It's insane.
backlash against.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? But even how we looked at the timeline where it was like, yes, all women, not all men. It was like, which one started first?
Yeah.
Because it seemed like not all men started first, and then it was like, yes, all women. So it's like, like all of these things, it's hard to tell with social media where the point is. But like, I love what she says about like the mindfulness and the political correctness, or like come correct kind of idea, because it also makes me think again, like I said before, the master's tools cannot dismantle the master's house. Like that's an Audre Lorde quote. And it's like our idea of like using domination, hate, all of that to like get up or like come out of the trenches of like oppression and all of that is a patriarchal white supremacist way of looking at things. We are using the master's tools to try to dismantle the master's house, and that is not possible. You know what I'm saying? Like, we are experiencing hate from men, and then we're like, oh, we're just going to use domination and hate on them too. And that is not how you do it. So it's like when we look at these queer Black feminists from like the 80s, they've been saying this stuff, you know?
And it's like all of that, it's like, it's all very emotional. It's like no one's thinking in context of like revolutionary thought, intersectional feminism. And even just the way you laid that out, that it's like, that's a very like white supremacist patriarchy way of thinking of things. And it's like, I'm so guilty of that in the past. Like,
same.
We both are. Like, and it's like, you're acting out of like emotions, but like not actual change. And like how we got that confused, it's like sad and it sucks. Cause
I mean, it's like, ingrained in us though.
Right.
Like, it's again, like the patriarchy of your mind, the white supremacy of your mind. It's like you feel attacked, you fight back with like anger and rage in the same way. Cause like when we talk about, you know, processing our emotions and all of that, like a lot of things, even girl boss feminism, like women are emulating what they believe to be power and what we see with like white men and stuff. So we're just like replicating it, but that's not what's going to get us out of what we've been in.
Yeah. And a lot of people are like, they stand tall and being like, well, I'm not trying to like get us out of what we're in. Like, I just want to like be funny and like make jokes and be like, men suck or whatever. But it's just like, it is detrimental, and not on the individual people doing this, but like on the broader context of society. Like that is like, that's the detrimental part, is like when everyone hops on that wave because they're not thinking critically. They just feel like, yes, this is the answer. Like, and it is fighting fire with fire, and it's not a bad thing. Like, again, I've done it. I've lived it. Like, I felt that way. Like, I even feel that way sometimes still. Like, and it's like a choice every day, but it's like we have the power to make that new choice, like Bell Hooks is saying.
Yeah,
but language is so important. Like,
the
and like you said,
part.
like, there's a time and a place to say certain things, but like how you say things is essential, even if you don't feel like it is, especially if you're putting a video on TikTok that gets millions of views. Like, how you say things is so fucking important.
And it's hard. It's
hard. It's a lot of weight on our shoulders, but it's like, if we want to get to a place and like actually get out of the trenches, like in a way that's actually possible, and that is not like enforced by patriarchy and white supremacy, then we need to do that. We need to make
Yeah.
that new choice and use the right language that we've critically thought about and then speak.
And even how you were talking about the people that are like, oh, you know, I'm not trying to change anything. Like, this is just funny. This is like whatever. I think like we saw in the timeline too, the ways that real feminism started as intellectuals, critical thinkers. They were doing these texts. There wasn't social media. They had time to think about this. They were like coalescing all of this stuff. Like it turned into a lot of pop feminism and like coffee table books and like all of this. And even the interviewer digital feminism. And even the interviewer asked her at one point in the interview, like, are you ever tempted, you know, because she had bestsellers and she has a cult following, but like not in the same way as if she watered it down, because she is known as someone who brings points of view from everything. Like she'll bring in like Buddhism and then like gangster rap. Like she talks about that. So it's like, you know, but that is crucial, and it is uncomfortable to consider multiple perspectives outside of your own and bring them into the conversation. It's so much easier to make a little, and of course, like we should still make jokes and we can still do the little, like I'm not saying eliminate it because like we want free speech,
censorship.
Like we want,
we want it all out there.
But we just challenge more people to be questioning these things and like start a bigger conversation beyond just the capitalistic feminism that has been
and ultimately
out.
You guys, that's why our episodes went from an hour to 3 to fucking 3-4. Like that is literally why, because we learned through doing this podcast that it's not enough. Like you need to consider so many other things in order to get to the root, in order to like attempt to solve something. So
because we're not like, it's so hard because it's like what point do we start at? And like I don't know, we just want to do topics justice. So next, moving out of algorithms and into the fact that, oh shit, it is the broader culture, it is probably patriarchy. We're pulling from Terrence Real, who is a white man but is a feminist, and Bell Hooks quotes him a lot in her book Men, Masculinity, and Love, which we're gonna read some quotes from after. But one of the things that Terrence Real talks about in his books, because he focuses a lot on masculinity and on learning toxic masculinity and dynamics between men and women and intimate relationships, because he's a psychologist. So he uses the analogy of like the mother and the father, because like as he sees in therapy, a lot of it stems from like our upbringing as children. But I think we can also look at it like metaphorically as like the mother and the father and like culture and like our ideals of femininity and masculinity as well. So when he's talking about, you know, patriarchy and men, he says they have learned not to expect their father to attend to them, to be expressive about much of anything. They have come to expect him to be psychologically unavailable. They have also learned that he is not accountable in his emotional absence, that mother does not have the power either to engage him or to confront him. In other words, father's neglect and mother's ineffectiveness at countering it teach boys that in this family, at least, men's participation is not a responsibility, but rather a voluntary and discretionary act. Third, they learn that mother, and perhaps women in general, need not be taken too seriously. Finally, they learn that not just mother, but the values she manifests in the family, connection, expressivity, are to be devalued and ignored. The subtext message is engage in quote-unquote feminine values and risk a similar devaluation of yourself. The paradox for the boys is that the only way to connect with their father is to echo his disconnection. So, like, I think this goes to show, like, a lot of men are oppressed, imprisoned by their psychological patriarchy. That's a term he uses a lot in his text, where it's like they're not, like, intentionally consciously believing every day that women are not to be valued and feminine qualities are not to be valued. They have been brought up and learned, like taught in this society, that their disconnection is crucial to them being able to be seen as like powerful and have a voice. And so that means devaluing women. And so that's what we see playing out with like the manosphere and Andrew Tate, like reinforcing these ideas. And so it's like, if we're blaming the patriarchy and the system and all of that comes before it is the problem, then you can look at men to a certain degree as like victims of this system as well. And until we heal that, women can't be free, because men will continue to devalue men until it's fixed in their mind.
Right.
You know?
And it's like, I wish when we like thinking about the timeline and like first wave, second wave, and then men's liberation started, like, all of these things that women deal with and that men deal with because of patriarchy, like if they were unified, it's like, I don't think we would be in this place we are today.
Right.
And it's just like, you don't talk about like the nuances of how boys grow up. It's like, oh, like they can't cry, like blah, blah, blah. But it's like, it's so much deeper than that. And it's, you're right. Like, it's not like every day they're actively thinking like women are below me, like hopefully. And like, it's like they learned that by like growing up in the society, like from they were very young. And it's like the cause and effect of things, not like a direct result.
Right. And it's like the devaluation of not just women, but also feminine qualities or things that are seen as feminine qualities, like empathy, connection, all of those like things that are key to dismantling the patriarchal, like, you know, so if we see all of those qualities, then why are we emulating them? And like, you know,
exactly. So now we're going to pull from Bell Hooks, The Will to Change. And we did talk about this in our Sprinkle episode, right?
And men have feelings.
And men have feelings. So we've used this text before, but again, thinking about patriarchy in the context of both men and women. Bell Hooks says, the first act of violence the patriarchy demands of males is not violence towards women. Instead, patriarchy demands of all males that they engage in acts of psychic self-mutilation, that they kill off the most emotional parts of themselves. And that part is bolded because that was like a huge moment for us when we first read this. If an individual is not successful in emotionally crippling himself, he can count on patriarchal men to enact rituals of power that will assault his self-esteem. And that sentence is literally why Andrew Tate was able to do what he did.
Yes.
That sentence exactly. Like,
exactly.
If they're emotionally crippled, if you're lonely, if you're lost, it's like you can go to patriarchal men that like actively enforce these values to like pick you up and like make you more powerful, but it's all a lie.
Reinforce the patriarchy.
Right. Damn, that's tea, bitch. Like that sentence literally like
this whole thing is just like, bro, like mind-blowing.
Mind-blowing. And it's like Bell Hooks like knew the future, knew everything, you know? And more people too, but just this exact text. Feminist movement offered men and women the information needed to challenge this psychic slaughter, but that challenge never became a widespread aspect of the struggle for gender equality. And like she talks about, often the voices most silenced are radicalized feminine values. Women demanded of men that they give more emotionally, but most men could not understand what was being asked of them.
This part is huge because, again, we're blaming men. We're like, what the fuck? They don't know what they're doing. Like, and how could they unless they're actively unlearning it, you know?
And it's like, we all know, it's like, especially as white women, it's like, you're not going to start actively unlearning, like, when you're 13, 14, like, depending on your situation, like, this shit takes time. And so it's like, why can't we look at that like the same way for men, especially like men of color? It's like they were not raised to like give us that, like generally speaking. And that's not their fault. It's not their family's fault. Like that's how it is. Like you are born and that's what happens until you do something to change that.
Right. And it's also not saying that like similar to us and how we were talking about like, you know, there is so much black feminist text out there, anti-white supremacist text out there from like black women and black communities. We don't need to go to black people and be like, hey, teach us something. Like we should want to learn on our own. But like it's the same with men to an extent. So I understand why women are frustrated because it's like we've been saying this for so long. But like until we get this part that like it is literally not in their like it's in their chemical makeup, but it's not in their like social
like cultural makeup.
Yeah. That, you know, they need a little more encouraging.
Exactly. Having cut away the parts of themselves that could feel a wide range of emotional response, they were too disconnected. They simply could not give more emotionally or even grasp the problem without first reconnecting, reuniting the severed parts. And it's like, maybe like in a sense like rehabilitation or like even like self-improvement like maybe was seen like as a feminine thing in a way to like think critically and like change yourself. Like maybe that is like hard for them too. And it's like that's why they wanted to just go to patriarchal men. Like, they didn't want to do that inner healing, feeling work because, like, they don't want to be
because they don't
feminine
know
in
how.
any way.
Yeah.
And they don't know how. Yeah.
Because they are broken, and I think they are trying to fix the severed parts of themselves. They're just seeking it out from something that's reinforcing patriarchy. But it's like, again, until a lot of this is fixed, I don't think we can solve a lot of the issues that come with, like, violence against women and, like, you know, a lot of the dating issues and, like, the like, until it starts in their psyche, and until we can, like, and until we realize that that's a huge issue for us too, and how it ends up manifesting on the backs of us.
Right. And being more accepting, because while every man is, like, going through this shit, like, it's really not every single one that is, like, wanting to be that patriarchal man that, like, Andrew Tate is, you know? Like, so it's like we need to be more accepting, and again, not ruling someone off just for, like, certain things, like, oh, he couldn't emotionally commit, like, men are fucking trash, hate him.
Right.
If that was the only thing he couldn't do, it's like, if you thought critically about all this shit, like, obviously if someone's an abuser, it's like, yeah, fuck them, like, get them out of your life, but it's like,
have some grace. And it's like, you know, date, especially with your dating relationships, which we're going to get into in a minute, like, have your boundaries and know yourself, like, know what you're not going to put up with and whatever. But when we look at broader men as a whole, like, I think there needs to be more grace and empathy.
Right.
You know?
I do too. Continuing to read, Bell Hook says, emotionally wounding boys is socially acceptable and even demanded in patriarchal culture. Denying them their right to be whole, to have integrity, is not only encouraged, it is seen as the right way to do things. Terrence Real says that we force our children out of the wholeness and connectedness in which they begin their lives, and then encourage them to bury their deepest selves, to stop speaking or attending to the truth, to hold in mistrust or even disdain. The state of closeness we all, by our nature, most crave. Exposing the harsh reality of the psychological patriarchy, Real has the courage to speak his truth. We live in an anti-relational, vulnerability-despising culture, one that not only fails to nurture the skills of connection, but actively fears them.
Mm-hmm.
Teaching boys to despise their vulnerability is one way to socialize them to engage in self-inflicted soul murder. This wound in the male spirit, caused by learned acts of splitting, of dissociation and disconnection, can only be healed by the practice of integrity. Wounded males must recover all the parts of the self they abandoned in serving the needs of patriarchal maleness. Such recovery is the necessary groundwork for restoring integrity to male being.
Yeah, and restoring integrity to our culture and dismantling patriarchy as well.
Exactly.
She goes on to say, to heal, men must learn to feel again. They must learn to break the silence, to speak the pain. Often men, to speak the pain, first turn to the women in their lives and are refused a hearing. In many ways, women have bought into the patriarchal masculine mystique. Asked to witness a male expressing feelings, to listen to those feelings and respond, they simply turn away. There was a time when I would often ask the man in my life to tell me his feelings. And yet when he began to speak, I would either interrupt or silence him by crying, sending him the message that his feelings were too heavy for anyone to bear. So it was best if he kept them to himself. Women are fearful of hearing men voice feelings. I did not want to hear the pain of my male partner because hearing it required that I surrender my investment in the patriarchal idea of the male as protector of the wounded. If he was wounded, how could he protect me? And it's like, exactly, like, we as women, sometimes we want to dismantle the patriarchy, right? But we don't want to dismantle the patriarchy in the ways that it does serve us in a sense, because it's like, but it doesn't, right? Ultimately, it's not serving us, because by cutting off a man from his emotions and not making him whole puts more of the emotional labor onto us. But we want to believe in this false narrative of like him as a hero and someone who can save us from all of our emotions that are too heavy to carry. But we're carrying his emotions because he can't carry his. So it's like this cycle and this paradox of like, we think he's saving us by being so like stoic and not emotional or whatever, but he's like that, which is causing us more effort, which makes us need to believe in a hero and need to believe in being saved. So it's like, yeah, I don't know. It's insane.
And especially like, I'm just thinking like, maybe this is like off base, but like I'm just thinking, like, especially as heterosexual women, it's like we grow up with this idea of masculinity. Like, men are providers, they're macho, they're strong, like nothing can break them, like they're not crying. But it's like, yet we want them to be emotional so bad. But then you also think about, like, they're demonized for that patriarchy, blah, blah, blah. But also, like, from, like, actual people and women, it's like, it gives you the ick. Like, if he's being
the sassy man.
Yes!
Yep.
If he's being a sassy man and, like, all these things, it's like, to an extent, like, heterosexual women, like, are innately attracted to, like, a non-emotional man. And, like, even, like, you know? So I'm just thinking, like, about all of this, like, politically and dating, like, what this whole episode is. And I just remember the first time I read the line about, you know, Bell Hooks was speaking from her perspective, like, I often, like, silence the men in my life by my tears or being like, this is, and that shows them, not directly, but, like, through cause and effect, that, like, this is too much. Like, you're making me cry. You don't want to make a woman cry. That's, like, the biggest thing. Like, don't do that. And I've done that in my own life, too. And that's just, again, on thinking critically. Like, no one needs to be mad at themselves. And it's like, if these things weren't happening, we wouldn't be able to think critically about them and change them. It's just, it's so important. So now we're going to talk more about hooks, but we're going to pull from the book All About Love. And this is a little bit about dating, but more so about patriarchy and how it affects all of us, specifically in the context of, like, lying and how men view truth telling and, like, things like that. So Bell Hooks says, the men I have loved have always lied to avoid confrontation or take responsibility for inappropriate behavior. In Dorothy Dinnerstein's groundbreaking book, The Mermaid and the Minotaur, Sexual Arrangements and Human Malaise, she shares the insight that when a little boy learns that his powerful mother, who controls his life, really has no power within a patriarchy, it confuses him and causes rage. Lying becomes one of the strategic ways he can act out and render his mother powerless. Lying enables him to manipulate the mother even as he exposes her lack of power. This can make him feel more powerful. Males learn to lie as a way of obtaining power, and females not only do the same, but they also lie to pretend powerlessness. In her work, Harriet Lerner talks about the way in which patriarchy upholds deception, encouraging women to present a false self to men and vice versa. So this was, like, super interesting to me. Like, patriarchy upholds deception. And, like, I feel like in my own life, like, I've definitely, like, felt like I needed to be someone else around men specifically, because at the end of the day, like, within the gender binary, there is, in heterosexual relationships, there's a dynamic of power that's going on that's different from queer and same-sex relationships and things like that. So it's like, you don't want to play a game, but at the end of the day, it's like, a lot of it is game-like. And just the part about how, like men grow up thinking that, like, lying is, like, a strategic way that, like, he can act out. And, like, men growing up, like, seeing their mother as, like, so powerful. I mean, how many times, like men are, like, passionate about their mothers, like, especially if they have single mothers, but they still can see, like, how their mother is being mistreated, whether she was in an abusive relationship or on the street being catcalled, like, harassed and things like that, or just the fact that she's trying to build and, like, make her life better, but she has so many barriers knocking her down. And it does make them angry, but, like, subconsciously they are learning and seeing, like, women are treated differently.
Yeah, and it makes me think about, like, Andrew Tate and pickup artists, and even on the women's side, like, the whole idea of the game and how you need to deceive and manipulate in order to, like, get a woman to love you or serve you or, like, all of that. It all comes back to this. And even on the women's side, how you said, like, you feel ways in which, like, when you're in a relationship or, like, with a man, like, you have to change yourself. Like, and I think we'll talk about that more when we get into the dating side of things, but it's like, women do still uphold and reinforce patriarchy even within ourselves. And sometimes I think our perceptions of, like, what men will think about us are false. Like, we're almost, like, showing up in a way that we want to, like, we're trying to get them to, like us, and we're trying to do what we think that they'll like. Right. But I feel like more and more, even in, like, honestly, all of my recent relationships, I've had some of the men that I've dated, like, and they weren't the best people, like, whatever, be like, why are you, like, doing that? Or why are you, like, acting fake? Or, like, my brother would always be like, you put on this, like, fake voice when we're around, like, other people. Like, you're doing that, like, people-pleasing thing. And then I'll, like, get mad at him and be like, what, like, when we're around family members or other people, why does he not, like, get off of his phone and, like, be all friendly and da-da-da? But it's like, I don't have to either. I could just sit there and be quiet just like him. But I'm doing it because of what society has told me that I'm supposed to do.
Yeah.
So instead of getting mad at him, I should just, like, stop putting that pressure on myself.
Right.
Like, you know?
Exactly. And literally a core memory for me in like 6th grade middle school is when the hottest guy in the whole fucking class sat me down and was like, why do you act dumb? You're so smart. And I literally was like, oh my God, like, thank you, like, whatever. But that's on, like, bimbo culture and, like, being what you think men want based on all the 2000s movies, like, whatever.
Yep.
It's so real. Reading some more. Often men who would never think of lying in the workplace lie constantly in intimate relationships. This seems to be especially the case for heterosexual men who see women as gullible. Many men confess that they lie because they can get away with it. Their lies are forgiven. To understand why male lying is more accepted in our lives, we have to understand the way in which power and privilege are accorded men simply because they are males within a patriarchal culture. The very concept of, quote, being a man and, quote, a real man has always implied that when necessary, men can take action that breaks the rules, that is above the law. Patriarchy tells us daily through movies, television, and magazines that men of power can do whatever they want, that it's this freedom that makes them men. The message given males is that to be honest is to be soft. The ability to be dishonest and indifferent to the consequences makes a male hard, separates the men from the boys. And again, that's on like men. Patriarchy teaches us like men, don't be feminine, don't be soft, don't do any of these things. It's like be hard, be like a fucking Iron Man. I don't know.
Right.
And that's the result of all of this. So yeah, I love this.
Exactly. And then it's on us as women, and I think more and more women, this is the good side of like the decentering men and all the conversations that are going on about that is like women are like, I'm not putting up with certain things anymore. Like if he's gonna lie to me, I'm not gonna act like I don't know he's lying and continue to be in this relationship. Like I'm gonna put my foot down. So I think that part of things, when we talk about like situationships and dating and everything that's come, I think women are like standing in their power and taking a lot back in certain senses because they're like, no, you simply can't get away with this anymore. Like, I'm not gonna let you.
And like from like an individualistic and like caring about yourself, like it's amazing. Like you want to set those boundaries. You don't want to feel those consequences. Like you want to be sure of yourself. But in a revolutionary lens, you're not enabling men anymore, you know?
Exactly.
So both things are like true and powerful.
Yeah, exactly. Reading on, it says, even boys raised in the most progressive, loving households where parents encourage them to express emotions learn a different understanding about masculinity and feelings on the playground, in the classroom, playing sports, or watching television. They may end up choosing patriarchal masculinity to be accepted by other boys and affirmed by male authority figures. And exactly, like we see that with like the Andrew Tate stuff and the pipelines, right? Like they might get into it with the good intentions and then fall down a rabbit hole unless it's corrected.
And even like me growing up with two moms, like I was raised to believe like queer relationships are beautiful, interracial relationships are beautiful, but then I would go to school and like was like low-key homophobic. Like it wouldn't even matter, you know? It was like a secret that I had to keep. So I like relate to that and see that for men as well.
Yeah. Patriarchal masculinity requires of boys and men not only that they see themselves as more powerful and superior to women, but that they do whatever it takes to maintain their controlling position. This is one of the reasons men, more so than women, use lying as a means of gaining power in relationships. A commonly accepted assumption in the patriarchal culture is that love can be present in a situation where one group or individual dominates the other. And Bell Hooks has done a lot about this concept of love and like how care is not love. And she got a lot of backlash about that stuff. She talked about it in the interview, Speaking Freely, which guys, like honestly go watch the whole interview. It's only like 27 minutes, but it's like,
it's
like
not
every
bad.
word. Yeah,
not
every
like our
word
shit.
is like so worth it. Yeah, honestly, like every word is so worth it. But like this is the part too that it like in the conversation about decentering men that I'm thinking about, and we're talking a lot about men and masculinity and all of that, like right now, and it feels very against the whole idea of decentering men, but it's like, what exactly is decentering men, right? Because it's like, I think a lot of times we think to decenter men, we can't talk about men and men's issues at all. But then by not doing that, we're not realizing the patriarchy, the psychological patriarchy that's in our own mind. You know, like we can't just ignore them completely. That's not decentering them. Like, you know?
Exactly. And talking about decentering men, a lot of stuff you see online is like don't care what men think. Like male validation is like a really bad thing. But again, it's like aligning with patriarchy. It's like patriarchy tells us like, oh, you need male validation. So then we're just going to completely reject that instead of doing what Bell Hooks says is to think critically, because being validated by a man, especially as a heterosexual woman, is not a bad thing. Like speaking from being queer, like when you and I are like validated by a woman or like you look, it's like,
it feels
but that's
good to be
okay.
Validated by anyone. Like it's love and it's connection and it's all those things that are under patriarchy. We just don't see as valuable.
It's about not enabling them to continue this, and it's about like speaking up. It's not about ignoring their issues or being like, if I have male validation, like I'm a pick-me girl. Like that's not what decentering men should be about. And I think we can learn directly from Bell Hooks about that. But now we're gonna watch a TikTok about this whole idea, do one more poll, and then we're gonna get into the dating gender wars. So let's watch this TikTok together.
Women are choosing bears, men are choosing trees. Now, one thing that we really do need to talk about is men need to understand that a large part of why they can't talk about their feelings to women, and really just in general, is because of the big P word, which is, you know, patriarchy. Just don't scroll away from this video, just listen, okay? Just listen. I'm not gonna rag on men in this video. I'm just going to, it's gonna rip, okay? Patriarchy is what's warranting that you as a man be a mindless soldier worker drone that has little to no humanity, okay? When women say that they don't want to be with a man who shows his emotions or cries or talks about his emotion, that woman is incredibly toxic. Those women who act like that are incredibly toxic, but they're acting that way because of the patriarchy. They have also been indoctrinated into patriarchy just like you have. First, men need to start talking to each other about their emotions. Y'all need to start having conversations with each other about your emotions and what you're going through as men.
And this is kind of like reiterating everything that we're saying, that Bell Hooks is saying and that Terrence Real is saying as well. And like, I like that he is calling out the women that are saying that as toxic, and also telling men like, you're mad at the wrong thing, because so many men are like, oh, it's women's fault for not blah, blah, blah. But like, no, like women are also, you know, victims of patriarchy, and they are thinking in their patriarchal brain. And that's what's causing this. Yeah. And it made me think too, because I feel like for so long, and like even we're on this new journey of like, you know, thinking critically about feminism and criticizing like some women, like from a loving place of like, we understand you, but we want to push things forward. Like I saw this recent TikTok where this woman was talking about like more like her mental health journey and like stuff like that. And she was saying like how she realized at a certain point, like when she was really depressed, that she was like victimizing herself, and she was like seeing the whole world as like, everything is so bad. So like, what can I really do? Like everything's just so bad. And like, it's really hard to get out of that place, right? When you are struggling with like mental health, or when you are oppressed and you have all these forces against you. But like, and that's how I think women are, and why we make excuses for it a lot of the times, because it's like, okay, it's okay for women to reinforce patriarchy and to be toxic with men because they're oppressed. So it's like, they're only doing what has been done to them. So it's like, obviously it's excusable. It's not the same thing as men who have always had the power. But the problem in that is that you're still making excuses, and you're operating from privilege, and you're avoiding being uncomfortable with change. You know, so
that was so fire. Like, honestly, I can't even add to that. Like, I feel like that is exactly fucking it.
Yeah.
And I feel like this does bring us into the next poll, like talking about who's to blame. Like, is it the algorithms? Is it patriarchy? If you're a man, is it woman? If you're a woman, is it men? We asked our audience who upholds and reinforces patriarchy, gender roles, and sexism. 56% said everyone. 32% said the system itself. 9% said men. It's not funny, but it kind of is. 3% said women. And I'm like, men aren't like, it can't all be them. You know what I mean? Like, it's like impossible. And like, I know it's like, as a woman, it's like easier to think that way. And it's like, I have like a little bit more empathy for men saying it's women's fault, because it's like, we do that too. even though like women are oppressed more, like I do understand that. And like we're in individualistic society, like it's never our fault. It's the other groups. It's the Democrats. It's the Republicans. Like whatever it
bias,
is.
yeah.
And I think like we used to like be like it's the algorithms, it's social media, it's patriarchy. And while I do think like everything does play into a role, I think like the real answer like is us, the American people.
Yeah, and it's the system.
Which I don't like that, but it's
everyone.
true.
Yeah, it's the system because there's certain structural things in place, like the prison system, like the laws against abortion, like the education system, like all of those structural, systemic issues that need to be dismantled. But then it's like also within the people, and the people have so much power than we think we do sometimes. And like more and more we're losing it though. Like we're losing our rights to access to education. We're losing our rights to like housing, to making money. Like capitalism is just like choking it down.
Like
further
even marriage
and
love.
Yeah, so the
our
system
body.
is like, yeah, the system is like swallowing us. But we do have more power than we think we do. And like with social media, like we have more access to, you know, content. A lot of it is trash that you have to weed through.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's everyone. Yeah, it's everyone, and it's also the system. Definitely.
Right, and we can learn from trash content, like unfortunately, but it's like we really can.
So now we're gonna move into the gender wars, and this sentiment from this guy on TikTok is, you know, similar to what a lot of people are feeling about all of the dating gender wars that are going on right now.
Honestly, I think this is just a result from the constant back and forth men and women have had on social media for like the past 3 to 5 years, bro. We've all sat back and witnessed as men and women constantly argue about 50-50, share their unrealistic expectations, share their horrendous dating stories and ridiculous hypothetical situations. And that has just completely turned everybody off from dating as a whole, bro. Men don't want to approach women anymore because they don't even know if women want to be approached, and they don't want to be labeled as a creep. Women act like they're completely turned off from men. So everybody just said, fuck it. Plus, everything is high as fuck right now, and ain't nobody trying to add an extra stressor to their life.
So I like how he's pointing to the types of content, right? Like the 50-50, hypothetical, all these fucking stupid conversations. And then he's bringing in capitalism as well. Like how we're all just like fed up. We're like having these imaginary conversations. We're not relating to each other. And it makes me think of Bell Hooks' quote where she was like, we live in a patriarchal something anti-relational society, a capitalistic society. And it's like, exactly, the capitalism is what's pushing the individualism because we're all just struggling to make it, but the anti-relational because we're not operating in reality and from a point of connection. We're operating from a point of like, fuck you, I just care about myself, like whatever.
Right. And I used to blame that anti-relational disconnection society on social media and just say it's because of social media, we're all chronically online. But it's not true. We could learn from a lot of things going on social media. It's really because of like what you just said, like all of the hatred that we're feeling and like using patriarchal methods of like fighting against each other, even though the common enemy that we both should be angry with is the world we grew up in. So like what we said.
Yeah. And then we also just want to show like an example of some of like how these gender wars go too far, right? Like I feel like, especially because our audience is predominantly like women and like queer people and stuff like that, like we know how bad the manosphere gets. Like we know how awful it is. If you want to like look at our gender wars episode from a year ago, you can see some comments there. Any, you know, queer woman of color,
or even
skinny,
just look at Your Body, My Choice guy.
Yeah, exactly. Nick Fuentes, like there are so many examples, but I think like we turn the blind eye because of our bias as women or as feminists or whatever to what's really going on our side of the line. And so here's a good example of it. We have this post from this woman. It's a meme, but it says like a girl shoots her boyfriend 23 times for liking another girl's post. And this is a common thing in the gender wars, right? Like men, they're just so thirsty on social media. They're liking other girls' posts, like da-da-da-da. And the comments are like, Girl Math says there were 23 posts like, I hope she's okay. Oh my God, I hope she's okay. No, because yes, only 23. No explanation needed. We would be friends, girl. Put this on his For You page. So it's like, and these comments have like over 100 likes, like 9,000 likes. And it's like, this is the rhetoric where it's like, it's a joke. Like these women are joking. But what are we joking about? We are joking about, and it's like, I'm going to take this deep and I'm going to take it deep because it's like, I am a survivor of domestic violence. It's like, that shit is fucking real and anyone can do it. Like, men can be victims of domestic violence as well. To shoot someone 23 times, what are we literally talking about? And what are we literally joking about? Like, I saw a TikTok the other day of this like male teacher who's a high school teacher, and he was like talking about how like awful and scary it is that there's so many little boys that are like joking about rape and all of this stuff. And like, it's really scary. And I remember that being a thing in like middle school and like forever. Like, but now we have women doing the same shit. And it's like, if you've ever been a survivor of this shit, why the fuck would you ever say that about anyone?
Right.
You know? So it's like, again, we're using the master's tools, trying to dismantle it. It's not fucking working. Like,
and at the end of the day, like gender violence, like race violence is at the core of patriarchy and white supremacy. So again, it's just like using those same methods to get back at men supposedly, but you don't realize like the harm that you're doing to like your psyche and soul, like especially if you're heterosexual. Like the hetero pessimism just blows my mind. And like we can relate to it to an extent, but like as queer women, like it is different when that's not our only option to go to men. And like, especially for me right now, like I have a crush, like I'm like, yeah, no.
You're towing the line.
So it's just like, it's really harmful. And again, like jokes can exist, comedy can exist, but it's like there's a space, there's a time and a place for it. And also you just have to be so careful when it's online, because think about this. Think about 11, and we've talked about this, I forget who said it. Think about 11 or 12-year-old young boys reading these comments and the impact that has on them. And someone said it, I forget who it is, but we are creating the men that we claim to hate in a way.
Yeah. And exactly. And think about how it feels when we see comments from men like that. Like,
come on, bro. What are we doing?
It's simply like some jokes are simply not funny. And it's like, again, like all the content should exist, like the marketplace of the ideas.
We don't
want to censor certain things. But these are dangerous words. And it's like, if you say this, I think you should really reflect on how you operate in relationships, because I think you're towing the line of being abusive. And that's a really scary place to be.
Don't kill yourself over it, but just do better and like be more open, think critically. Exactly. Yes, what you said. So now we're going to get into some more polls about how certain genders feel about the dating pool right now. This is operating under a heterosexual lens. What do people want out of relationships? Do you want to start?
Yeah, I can start us off. So first we wanted to know how women are operating in the dating pool, right? Like we want to know how men are thinking women are operating in the dating pool, what their perception of it is versus what women's intentions are. So like intention versus impact, perception, we have a lot of different things at play, right? So first we asked men, how do you feel about women in the dating pool right now? And 56% of them said women only want men for money. Which is a huge narrative, right? 23% said women only want men for status.
Which is arguably kind of the same thing. Like money, status, those places exact fucking, and men are disposable, all that shit. Go ahead.
It's all like shallow reasons kind of thinking. Yeah, and it's sex too, 17%. Women only want men for sex. And then only 4% of men believe that women are in the dating pool looking for love and looking to settle down. That's genuinely what they believe. Now, I think as women who are in this heterosexual dating pool as well, like we don't believe this, right? And that's clear in our next poll.
And I think that 4% of women want men to settle down, to fall in love, the 4% that think that is, we've showed them that. You know, they didn't just come up with that. We did show them that through like this hustle culture, buy me a drink, all of that shit. Like that is like they didn't just get that from like themselves. Like I do think like women have showed men that, generally speaking.
Because we're playing a game in a lot of senses, right? Like on both sides, there are games being played. But women's true intentions, what they really want, we asked women what they really want out of their relationships with men, and 61% said love and a long-term partner, compared to what 4% of men believe. Okay, and then 26% said a protector and a provider. So that's pretty in line with what we would consider wanting men for money kind of situation.
Status situation, yep.
Yep. So, and then 13% said nothing, I've given up on men, which is good to see too that it's lower, because I think we have a false perception because of the 4B movement and decentering men voiceover that it's so big. It's really not like as big as we think it is. And then 0% said just for sex, which I was kind of surprised because honestly, like
damn,
why I'm
you
not in
don't...
my dating life right now. I'm like, I'm kind of in it for
Just
sex and companionship a little bit. Like I respect them as a person, but like I don't know if I'm ready to settle down like quite yet.
Two things can be true. You can want sex and also respect them. But I just think this is like so telling. Like men do not think women want to fall in love right now, but they actually do. But I can understand why men feel that way.
Yeah.
Because it's like women claim they want men to be more emotional, but then when they do get more emotional or even just direct with their communication, like we either cry, we silence them, it's too much, I don't want to talk about it right now. Again, I am guilty of this exact very thing in my last relationship with a man, like multiple times.
Yeah.
So I'm not like I don't want to separate this. Like I resonate with it, but to break it down like this is just like, wow, guys, wow.
Yeah, and it shows that like how much of the game is being played too, because it's like, I mean, I think sometimes men get confused when women have expectations in terms of like the courting phase, you know, because I do believe there's a certain amount of like chivalry courting, like earning each other's respect, like whatever. And we'll get into like how much of that is like necessary. Like, shouldn't we be operating from a place of vulnerability, good intentions, love, you know,
equity.
But we're also afraid of like being hurt and stuff like that too. So I think like the protector and the provider thing is still pretty high.
Right.
You know, so a lot of women are turning more into the view of what I consider to be like sex work lines of like, you're looking for a man to fulfill his patriarchal role.
Right. And it's it's not bad to like want your partner to like protect you and like provide for you sometimes. But like, if that's all you want, like over love, like that's when it becomes a problem. Because even in queer relationships, like I do look for like protector type women. Like I do. Like it is like, and I love that, you know, and I also like love to pay for my man too. Like it feels good to provide as well. So it's not like, again, to demonize yourself, but just like pay attention and think about why do you want that? Because that's patriarchy right there. Like they teach men to be that and you are attracted to that. Like there is a reason for that and you didn't come up with that on your own. But like as humans that like have beating hearts and like souls and like go into the afterlife and have soul families and everything I believe in, we do all want love and need love. Even if you're asexual, it doesn't need to be romantic love. Like love, connection community is like what humans crave and like animals. Like that's how it is. And monkeys. No, just kidding. So now we're going to talk about how women feel about men in the dating pool versus what men actually want out of relationships with women. So first, why are you smiling, bitch? Because you're excited?
This one's surprising to me, yeah.
I know. I haven't even looked, so I don't even know yet.
Yeah.
So women, how do you feel about men in the dating pool right now? 55% said men want women for casual sex. 30% said men want women to serve them. 15% said men want women for status. And 0% said men want women to settle down and fall in love. So again, with the zero, low percentage, I mean, it's crazy. And I can see why casual sex won. Because like, just as we talk about men being disposable, it's like also we do talk about women being disposable. They're just good for like one fuck, like one body, move on, like she's a slut, whatever. Like all of that language, like all bitches are the same, like that sort of thing. And then men want women to serve them. I mean, that's like the patriarchy one. That's like the direct opposite from like wanting a provider or protector. It's like wanting a woman to like make you a sandwich. Like, you know, so it's crazy, bitch.
I know. And it's even crazier. I'll read the next one.
Okay, go.
This is like women, like we're off. And it's like intent versus impact too, because is it the men, are they doing what they actually say? Again, are they capable of it? Because is it the internalized patriarchy and like all of that stuff going on, the psychological patriarchy where they're what they want is not aligned with their actions, because I think that's a role in it too. But guys, we asked men what they want out of their relationships with women.
No!
This broke my heart, bro. 75% of men want a love and a long-term partner. Again, compared to our women, only 61%, okay? And then 19% said nothing. I've given up on women.
That's higher.
Only 6% said emotional support and nurturing. And we kind of looked at this one as like, you know, the idea of the guy you're in a situationship with that just wants you around for that,
like vent.
Yeah, to
be a
fulfill
sassy
his
man.
emotional lack, like kind of thing.
Yeah.
And 0% said just sex.
So
which
these
is
are
the top one. Like we are.
These are all
fucking
opposing.
off.
And I don't want y'all to think like we're being hard on women, but it's like we are women and we want to be hard on ourselves.
Yeah, because I wouldn't have
because we are not like bro, like seriously. I say it and I'll say it again. I was the president of fucking Men Are Trash.
Men Are
like
Trash.
fucking worldly president, like screaming at them that they're fat, like horrible shit. Okay?
Yeah.
Like fat phobic, all that shit. So yes, but we need to challenge ourselves because, like, this is crazy. And, like, yes, it's, like, just our listener base, but, like, it's also our personal Instagrams. Like, Fiji has a lot of followers, like, a lot of men that are, like, attractive
And the men
cool,
sometimes vote in the polls, like, more than the women. Like,
yeah,
and I don't
not
know.
that you need to be attractive and cool to matter. That made it sound weird.
Oh,
I'm trying to
yeah.
say, like,
But,
the
like,
dating pool. Yeah.
Yeah, a good amount of men voted in these polls. Like a good amount of men submitted stories as well. Like they were active in this conversation.
Right. And it's like, why
and
would
a lot
they
of
lie?
them were responding to me too, saying like, I'm glad you're talking about this. And I was like, it was like so surprising to me because it was more men that said that than women. And not because it's like women, like we know, we've been talking about this for a while. Like,
Right.
I feel like we're in a different place in it, but like I think men do, and the more I'm thinking about it too, in my relationships that I've been in with men and like loving men and having intimacy with them, like they really are just like baby boys. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like when you get to know a man and love him, like I think in a lot of ways all the men that I dated were much softer than me in a lot of senses. Like I would just be like, I'm used to moving around the world, operating from a place of like, in a certain sense, like men will do certain things for me from a like shallow way. You know what I'm saying? But men don't like have that as much. So when they have a connection with a woman that they really love, like they love really, really hard because it's like they're filling that like gap that I feel like they don't always know how to access or like get to.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So it makes sense to me too, like when we think about how repressed that they are and how much they're like trying to play this game of how they think that they should act and how like we're reinforcing how they should act as well. Like the ways that it's like in reality. And I'm glad that the men voted, I think, from a place of truth too.
I know.
Like,
I
and
hope
maybe
so,
they're not.
shit.
I hope so. 'Cause,
Maybe
you
not
know, again,
every
men
single
lie.
one.
Men do lie, and that is a
We
thing
talked
too.
about
Like a lot
lying.
of men will play the game, will say this, and
Or
they
maybe
will lie
it's
about
like
things.
they're not lying. Like maybe they actually do want that, but like as
they
we
don't
like
know
learned,
how.
they don't know how exactly. And I do want to say, like right now, I'm like, we really like are like working to bridge the gap between like men's apologists that think men do no wrong, like whatever, and also like the men are trash people. Like it's like because everything is a little bit true and has nuance. But it's like we need to like get to the like middle point where it's like
because
no one is to blame. Like in fact, like we all are. Like we're not no better than one another. You know, like in terms of the gender wars and like fighting fire with fire.
Because it's like especially how we're saying with women, like how you said like it's not wrong for them to think that because of like their actions. It's the same with men. It's not wrong that women think that men just want them for casual sex because I think for a lot of men, they think that that is the avenue to getting a long-term relationship, or they're not even operating in the place of like maybe they really want love in a relationship, but they think that that's what they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like
and
it's both sides.
And same thing of what I said. It's like we as women have showed men that we only want them for money. I think men have showed women that all they want them for is sex. So it's true on both sides completely.
Which is why we get like so many like sprinkle and all of that stuff. And it goes in. But again, like us being former sex workers, like to me, it's like, you know, a relationship with a man that is only financially providing for me and I'm giving him sex or something like that is not love. That's sex work. Yeah. You know, like I want the emotional and the nurturing and the like connection that will never exist in the context of sex work. But so many women are appealing to the sprinkle method because I think they've never worked in sex work and they're viewing
They don't know the
relationships
blurred
as
lines.
labor.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're viewing relationships from a point of labor, and so are men in a lot of ways. Like they're viewing it as in terms of like domination. I'm gonna get this woman to serve me and not to like love me, you know?
Yeah. And a listener submitted like all 4, meaning like, you know, they agreed with all those polls. And someone else said, I think men don't know what they really want. And I challenge that to what I said too, is like, I think they do know what they want. They just don't know how to get there. They haven't been given those tools. And it's not like women have been given the tools perfectly either. But it's like, with all this shit we're talking about, it's like, how do we really connect? Like, how do we really find love when we're so polarized and the gender wars exist politically and like relationally? So then we asked, do you believe in high value men / high value women? And someone replied to Fiji's story and was like, what is that? So if you don't know what that is, like, it's kind of like what the manosphere and like Shira 7 and like people talk about in terms of like what a woman should be in terms of like patriarchy and what a man should be in terms of patriarchy, like kind of the provider, nurturer, like do your role, gender roles, that sort of thing.
And it's usually used from a point of like, well, I'm a high value woman,
And-
so you need to come correct and you need to do this.
Right.
Or I'm a high value man, so what are you bringing to the table? Like it's usually used as like kind of a standoff on relationships kind of thing. The gender wars, yeah.
Exactly. So 60% said yes, they do believe in high value men and women, and 40% said no. So pretty 50-50. I mean, it should be obvious, like we don't believe in that sort of thing. Like there's no right way a person should be and like all that shit. But this is a product like of our society. And again, we don't want to censor this type of speech because we don't want to censor any type of speech, not the radical views as well. But just interesting. I mean, I don't love that, but
yeah,
it's
I mean, it just shows how much of it is in our culture. Yeah. Despite how people voted in the polls, like they want love on both genders. They want, you know, love and connection in a long-term relationship, but they're still believing in these like gamified ideas of what relationships should be.
And I don't think women can get there either too, because it's like they are playing that slight game because you have the gender roles and the power dynamics. Like it's not like just men, like it's we both feel those effects so hard. And I feel like we're gonna say this throughout the whole episode. But like it took me a while to understand that, you know? So that's why I need to keep repeating it to myself. Like language is important.
Like a mantra, like a manifestation.
Exactly. Like even if you sound repetitive, it's like it's better to be clear about like what you mean, you know?
Yes, yeah.
So then we asked the ultimate question. Why do you think modern relationships are failing? And obviously we can only give 4 reasons on Instagram. So this is what we came up with. 56% said people only care about themselves. So this is very much operating in that individualistic, capitalistic mindset. 22% too many options. And that's like with social media and all the algorithms, it's like there's so many people out there. It's all in our face. Like people are disposable, both men and women, just on to the next one. 15% said confusion on gender roles. So like what should we be doing in these relationships? And 7% said politics. And I honestly think confusion on gender roles low key, but I mean, I think all of them, obviously. But I do wish gender roles got a little bit more love because I would argue that's higher up than the too many options thing. But I think, you know, the individualism, people only care about themselves, like that's definitely huge.
Yeah, I think it's the individualism and the gender roles operating together because it's like I'm only focused on me and like what I want and what you can do for me because of my gender role. And like you need to enact this gender role, like whatever. Yeah. Okay, so next we're going to get into listener stories, and we had quite a few in relation to these polls that we just discussed. So we're not going to talk. Yeah, so thank you guys so much. And we're not going to talk about a lot of them too much because it's echoing things we've already said, and we'll let them stand on their own. But the first one says, specifically lack of kindness and self-awareness. When you're in a serious relationship, you become half of a whole. So you either need to be a team player or not commit. Again, individualism.
And speaks to the gender roles too. It's like we're team players. We're not just like offering specific things under gender binary and masculinity and femininity and all that shit.
Right.
Someone else said, so 50 Cent said it best. Folks want traditional roles of the previous generation, not realizing that we are in the current make of our own traditions of dating. So you can't date people who's not willing to participate in the new style of dating because they think the same rules of dating apply. It's not the same rules as the previous generation. There is widespread accessibility for everyone, and with that comes different styles of living. Women don't have to stay in one place. Women are out earning man in jobs, but still making less. Men are caught up in high-value, right-wing talk holes. Couldn't have said it better myself. I love that. High-value, right-wing talk holes.
And we have another listener story from Alan, and he submitted a voice memo, which we love.
I'm all for healthy, like 50-50 relationships, right? And like, depending on where you are in your relationship, maybe one person's giving more, maybe one person's taking more, but that's how relationships work. I'm all for two adult individuals having their own individual lives and being together. I am not saying that like you should be in some sick codependent situation or something where like you're basically becoming Siamese twins. At the same time, what I found in dating a little bit recently, because I started doing that and now I have a boyfriend, but what I found was that some people just don't care. Like, it's like, you have to love me for me, but I don't put up with shit. And it's like, okay, but that's not how that works, right? Like, if you're going to be a team player, we need to play to the strengths of both of us, not offload everything onto a single person to like support you during the entire time. Like, you're not looking for a pedestal, you're looking for a partner, right? If that's what you are doing for long-term relationships. I mean, if you're doing it for personal gain, then, you know, do whatever you want to. You clearly don't care about that other person, and don't lie to yourself that you do. But like, it's one of those things where like, if you're in a relationship, I think one of the things that makes things fail is not even so much selfishness or ego, but it's like that lack of self-awareness that if I do X, then my partner is going to have to do Z. If I feel like cooking because I feel like cooking and it would be a nice gesture, then, you know, like I might go over to my partner's place and cook for them. But if I cook and then I leave the entire kitchen a mess because I'm done with the part that I enjoy and I did that for you, I just left you with cleaning to do, right? So like, let's not dress that up in some kind of way to be like, well, I did this thing, so it's only fair that you have to do this other thing. Like, no, that's not how kindness works. When you do something out of kindness, you inherently do it because you're not expecting anything in return. Maybe a thank you, maybe a smile or something, but it's not like, oh, okay, you know, I did this, so now you have to do that. Yeah, so I guess it's like lack of self-awareness and people's focus on everything being super transactional, like in a capitalist kind of way, as opposed to a symbiosis kind of way.
And I love this. It's like exactly like we're doing that standoff thing of like, I'm high value. No, I'm high value. No, you need to do this. No, you need to do that. And it's like, that's getting us nowhere. Like, we have to give to get in return. And that's that like connection, like vulnerability, like coming from a place of love and not a place of like capitalism.
Like, what really is love and connection? What does that look like? Because right now, I'm telling y'all, we don't have a goddamn clue.
Right.
Okay. Someone else said relationships are failing because popular media rotted our idea of relationships in our teens. People have lost the ability to do things just to do them. Everybody worried about the return. And then someone else said, regarding what men and women want from each other, I think most of them don't actually know. And that's kind of like echoing what Alan said too. Like, people have lost the ability to do things for their partner just to do them and like not expect something or have this 50-50 like, or what's going on sort of thing.
Why are we bargaining? Like,
yeah.
You know?
And I do agree with like popular media like rotting our ideas, but again, I think it's so much more than that. And I think we have to be really careful with like blaming the film and TV industry that are a product like of the system that we're actively upholding and like reinforcing whether we want to or not.
And this listener said, I don't know if I'm just cursed or something, but at the age of almost 23, I've yet to get into an actual relationship. Over and over again, I meet someone new and I'm told they're looking for a relationship / to build something with me. Then after a few weeks to a month of going on dates, but usually mostly just having sex, I get hit with the we should just be friends. I think we move too fast. I'm just going through a lot right now, etc. Or they even just straight up ghost, even though they just spent the last 5 months telling me they're going to fall in love with me. These men clearly want casual sex or more of a friends with benefits, but they'll lead you on thinking they're building a relationship with you just to abandon you once they feel things are getting too far emotionally. Or they're bored of the sex now. I've been a hopeless romantic ever since I was a child and saw Troy and Gabriella in High School Musical. Oh my God, I love that. But as much as I am a hopeless romantic, I have no problem with casual sex, and I'm so tired of men lying. So again, we get that lying thing. Yeah, and this is like how we were talking with even in the polls. It's like so many men say that they want this, but then why does it line up differently? And I know like in my last thing that I was in, it was really similar to this, where it's like, we had a lot of like love for each other and we were doing the casual sex. We were acting like a relationship, but then when it came time to commit, he never wanted to commit, and then we'd break up and then we'd get back together. And it's like, it's exhausting because it's like, okay, you want to be with me, but you don't, but you just want my benefit. And like, I think to me, it goes back to, again, part of the like psychological patriarchy and like whatever that like men are like trapped in, because they almost like, they can't let themselves reach a certain level of like vulnerability and openness, and like they get scared and they like pull away in that like avoidant thing. And also they could be lying, like Bell Hooks said, like they don't know how to relate it, but it is really like heartbreaking to like try to be building a connection with someone and loving someone, and then men do this. So it's like, as much as we say with the women, we understand why men think that we just want them for, you know, buying us a drink, protecting and providing. Men need to understand why we think this of them as well.
And I honestly think we've got to the point in the gender wars where men might even view being in a committed relationship as something that will make them soft, or like is a feminine thing.
Yes.
To commit to just one person. And it's like, that's like the worst thing for them, that patriarchy tells them that. And I also think it plays into the too many options thing as well. It's like they don't want to commit because there are quote unquote so many options, when, as we know, it's really always been like this. It just seems like that. But I really relate to this. It's always like, yes, they really fully get you to trust them, like probably are developing real actual feelings for you, if not definitely are.
Yeah.
And then when it gets, you know, you start, because when you fall in love, like, it's like you do get more emotional. It's like that puts them off. They don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
And I just, like, my heart goes out to you so much. And, like, we definitely both resonate with, like, the High School Musical thing, or just, like, looking at that in the media.
Being a hopeless
like, I know
romantic.
I do. I was like, damn, like, when they started singing together, karaoke night, like, I was like, oh my good God in heaven.
Too. Like, we need more, like
I wanted to be Gabriella and like also like make out with her, but yes.
But like, yeah, same. And my heart goes out to you too, because it's like, I get this and I feel this. And like, even how you had talked about like the former like path and content that you had gone down with like hating men, and like even our emotionally unavailable men to sprinkle pipeline. Like, I think it's beautiful that you are a hopeless romantic, and I hope that you keep that. And every day that you are keeping that, that is you challenging patriarchy, and that is you like believing in love and connection, like against like what else is happening. Because at the end of the day, you can't change a man. If he's gonna ghost you, and if he's gonna do this, and if he's gonna still act in his patriarchal mindset, like whatever, you can't change him. But don't let it send you down a spiral of like, well, there's something wrong with me and I need to just like, you know, go after men for money or something like that, you know?
Even though that seems like an easy way out, and it's like so fucking valid, but it's not gonna give you the result of like what you want. But yeah, thank you so much for like listening to our episodes and submitting this story.
And being vulnerable. We love the vulnerability.
And being vulnerable, and like being 23 too, and being able to like realize these things. Like when I was 23, girl, like.
And there's no problem with not having had a relationship yet being 23.
Oh my God. No.
Like honestly, I think
like,
in a lot of ways I would have been better off if I hadn't, because I think I would have known myself better.
Like needed more time. Yeah.
Yeah. Like look at it like, you know, I know it's hard because we all want that love and connection, but you're going to find it, and keep that hopeless romantic spirit, and like continue to focus on yourself, and like it's gonna come to you.
And not to like demonize other people, but I'm sure it's hard too. Like if you have friends that are in relationships, or you see that like in movies, you saw that like in school, it's like at the end of the day, like relationships like are like in kind of a cursed state right now. So it's like, don't be like jealous of that. Like be grateful that like you're on this own journey. And like, it sounds like you are thinking critically about things and not punishing yourself, even though it's easy to think like that. Like you said, like, what am I doing wrong? So kudos to you for like, you know, continuing to be, what's the word? Romantic.
A hopeless romantic.
A hopeless romantic. Yes.
Yeah. And 75% of men said they want to settle down and they want a relationship. So they're out there somewhere. Whether they're lying or not, I don't know. We'll have to see. But next, guys, we are going to get into loneliness. Okay, because we've seen throughout the timeline, a lot of people have been co-opted by these cults of like Andrew Tate, Shira Seven, the Wizard Liz.
And that prey on that loneliness and how you feel so lost. They use that, whether they're intentionally doing it so or not. They're pulling at your heartstrings in that way. Yeah, they are.
I think a lot of them definitely
I mean, Andrew Tate definitely, yeah. But I was
again,
like,
capitalism, they're trying to get money. Yeah, maybe not all of them. Like, maybe not all of them are. Like, sometimes it just spirals out of control. But, like,
exactly.
You're in a vulnerable place. And a lot of us want to act like, you know, no, I didn't end up in this alt-right pipeline in this manosphere because I'm vulnerable. Like, because especially men are, you know, they're like, no, I'm not. Whatever, but you are. And like once you look at it like that and we look at all people like that,
look at what's
we can
happening.
have more empathy. Yeah. And we're gonna explain why you're so vulnerable when you're lonely. So this article is talking about the science effects of heartbreak and loneliness on the body. And
as much as it's sciencey, it did open my eyes. I was like, oh shit. So don't be ruled off, because at first I was like, okay, Fiji's got like.
It sounds like a little whoop. Like, honestly, guys, when I was like in rehab, they kept fucking talking about mind, body, fucking spirit. And I'm sitting there like a little bit like, I think a lot of times I go into like the mind and the logical and like trying to put the pieces together and like whatever. And I'm not paying attention to my body. But even when I was in there, they're like, oh, cigarettes are killing you. This is a direct effect of like, you know, it does have effects. Like your emotional mind has big effects on your physical body, and like the pain is real, and this is what the science says. So in the immediate aftermath of a heartbreaking event, the body and brain enter fight or flight mode. That's the body's evolutionary embedded threat detection response system. When the brain senses an attack in the environment, such as a cheating spouse or a loved one's passing, it subconsciously spurs a cascade of physical symptoms. Heart rate quickens, palms sweat, and eyes dilate. These are all signs that a human is primed to face attack head-on or flee. Or fawn. We always fucking forget fawn, but fawn as well. The immediate hallmark symptoms of fight or flight mode ideally subside within minutes or hours after an attack ends. But in the case of emotional episodes, which often have no clear end in sight, like those heart-wrenching situationships, or even like your loneliness and not being able to find a partner, the heartbreak of being like, can I find someone?
Right.
The associated hypervigilance can persist and eventually contribute to chronic stress. So one of these scientists says that when we have been rejected by love, it feels very much like being literally abandoned in the jungle by yourself, like your literal body response. That's because on the neural level, the brain can't tell the difference between physical or emotional abandonment. So like this is chemical, guys. Like, we can't help it. I think so hard our culture tries to act like, why am I being soft? Like, let me just get over it. Let me just self-improve and work out and, like, fight the pain away. But it's like, it is okay. Like, your body, you can't fight your body's, like, natural responses to things. And your body feels this way. Like, an emotional impact is just as intense as a physical one.
And this is something that unifies us all. We're all humans. We all have the same fucking brain structure shit. Like, this is something that we can all fucking relate on, no matter if you're playing into your masculinity, if you're being patriarchal. Like, this is, like, a fucking fact. Like, this happens to all of us. Like, we say, like, men don't care about breakups. Like, yes, they do. Like,
yes, they do.
If they felt, like, real love, it's like, this is the brain. This is science. Like, this is believe science. Like, whatever.
This is what they're dealing with, yeah. So even if they don't show it because of patriarchy, there is such a thing as broken heart syndrome or takotsubo cardiomyopathy. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but it's a puzzling phenomenon that was identified in 1990 in Japan after people suffered heart attack-like symptoms after a devastating earthquake. So it's not always just a breakup. It's like this traumatic event that happens that makes you like more fearful and scared about your life, you know?
Yes.
And then in the wake of social loss or rejection, people often become increasingly agitated and suspicious of strangers. They have trouble regulating their impulses, finding it harder to moderate their consumption of things like alcohol and sugar and even content.
Social media.
Yep. And romantic grief can cause a sense of cosmic unease, says one of the scientists, ultimately feeling neither calm nor safe.
Because, like,
and then
we all know that feeling, like, after you're hurt and, like, your impulse to go, like, look at their page. It's, like, that is very, like, brain. Like, you're not talking it out with yourself. You're literally just, like, following your impulses because, like, you think it'll bring you, like, dopamine or just to, like, scratch that itch. Like, just go look, get it over with. But it's, like, yeah, that's fucking real. Like, the overconsumption of, like, all the things. Like,
you're trying to fill that hole.
Yeah, that
like,
hit,
you're trying to, you look for something to change it. Yeah. It goes on to say, heartbreak is an emotional trauma that really gets to the core of your identity and makes it hard to function the way that you need to. And then the scientist says it's really important to heal quickly because if you don't, there's lasting loneliness and heartbreak that can jeopardize physical health over the long term. And it goes on to say that, like, a growing body of evidence suggests that loneliness is linked to a lot of negative outcomes such as reduced mental health, increased risk of heart disease, high blood pressure, and even premature death. And one of the reasons for these dire outcomes comes down to our cells. On a cellular level, our bodies respond to rejection by pumping out more inflammatory cytokines and cortisol while down-regulating natural killer immune cells that fight viruses. That's why people who are chronically lonely, for whom this dysfunction doesn't resolve for months or years, are more likely to die younger. They're more likely to suffer from a range of chronic diseases that are driven by inflammation. And I want to say, like, one thing too, like, I've learned more about cortisol over, like, research and episodes. It comes up a lot. It's like a stress hormone or whatever. But there was a time when I was getting tested by an endocrinologist for, like, hormone stuff because I had polycystic ovaries and, like, endometriosis or whatever, and they had, like, taken my blood and my cortisol was, like, really, really high, and the doctor couldn't figure out why, and I, like, stopped going to the doctor and I, like, didn't really deal with it. But during that time period was the peak of my abusive relationship, and the more I learned about cortisol, looking back at that situation, I'm like, I think that that's what the source of it was. Like, my doctor was trying to figure out, you know, why is her cortisol so high? But I think it's because I was in fight or flight mode in the abusive relationship that I was in. So it just goes to show, like, this stuff is physical, again, as much as we want to act like it's not.
And we can't control it. It's literally out of our hands. Yeah.
Right. And then the scientist goes on to say, humans aren't optimally designed to be alone. We know even on a cellular level that there's safety in numbers. So it's like, this is how we are designed.
Yeah.
Community. This is, like, so wholesome and sad and stuff. But it says one experiment, recently rejected participants viewed photos of their ex-partners and either received a painful but tolerable stimulation similar to holding a very hot cup of coffee or received a non-painful warm stimulation.
Like,
all while
what?
hooked up to a machine. Yep. Scientists found that social and physical pain appeared to be rooted in the same areas of the brain. So the secondary somasensory cortex and dorsal posterior insula. These results give a new meaning to the idea of social rejection hurt. So, like, yeah, so they're saying, like, if you touch a hot cup of coffee or get coffee spilled on you, that pain is very similar to the feeling of rejection, like, literally physically in the body, even though you don't have a burn. And on the surface, we don't really think about those things, but that's what research suggests. And then from this Time article that talks about how lonely people are more vulnerable to extremist views, this researcher, John Capaccio, a social neuroscientist at the University of Chicago, shows that when people are lonely, they often feel more insecure. And though they may not be in any sort of physical danger, the extended solitude makes the mind-body system begin scanning for threats, being suspicious, firing warning signals. And this leads to, again, those elevated stress hormones like high blood pressure, poor sleep quality, high cortisol, and even increased risk of death. And loneliness.
We can't tell the difference between emotional and physical harm and pain.
Right.
Like, I'm like, Yeah, okay.
It's insane. And then the cycle feeds on itself, right? Because the more lonely people are, the more likely they are to isolate as well and become more anxious and more insecure and more fearful. And then it says this can be exacerbated by a cutthroat economy in which those struggling to make it have little or no time to build community. And those at the top all of a sudden suffer from status-driven workaholism, which also crowds out no time for social connection. And then a 2020 study published in the journal Group Processing and Intergroup Relations found that social exclusion is the leading factor behind radicalization. And a 2021 study found that loneliness is one of the predominant reasons people adopt extremist views and join extremist groups. And Terrence Real, back to him, he just has this really short quote that I love that says, "Those who do not turn to face their pain are prone to impose it." And like in the beginning, the first study, it's like he really stresses how important it is to fix this loneliness, fix this heartbreak, seek healthy, coping mechanisms, or else it's only going to get worse. And a lot of people think that they're doing that with this self-improvement, financial gain, fitness style of content, but it's really driving them further down the pipeline of patriarchy, loneliness, social isolation, etc.
And it's like the same thing could be said for like men are trash, like for women. And it's like what we've been saying this whole time. It's like you're still just like confining yourself to these patriarchal methods. Like, why don't we believe that we're powerful enough or like more of an agent of change? Like, why can't we think for ourselves? It's like, because they don't teach you to like think for yourself. Like you said at the beginning, like we are taught to be workers and to confine and to blend in, because God forbid you get any type of social exclusion, like what they're talking about. But it's like, this is actually, it's like this was patriarchy's plan all along, and like the ways that we're fighting back like are not working. And while they might feel good temporarily, like emotionally, like the long lasting impacts of the state of loneliness that all men and women are in. I mean, we just talked about why modern relationships are failing. Like, this is what we're headed towards. And like the manosphere and like using men for money and like all of these things, like hating women, it's like that is not the answer. Like, that's not going to make you happy and get that common goal that everyone's lost, because sometimes it's like, I don't think we know how much we want love and connection anymore. Like, we've just lost that.
But we need it at a cellular level.
Because everything's so individualistic, capitalistic, and all that. Yeah.
Yeah, and these influencers are these, and whether intentionally or not, because I don't think all of them it is intentional, and not all of them are scammers and like preying on you, but Andrew Tate definitely is. Yeah. And it's like literally like in incels, that whole ideology, like when you see like the suicides that come out of that, and like women as well, like, convincing ourselves that there's no men left in this world, or there's no men that we can build a connection with, like that is deeply painful. And the heartbreak and the loss that you're going to go through. I mean, not that everyone ultimately needs to be in a relationship or wants to be. Like, you can find community with just women. You can find community with friends until you're ready to like build that. And I do believe in that aspect of decentering men, like taking a vow of celibacy and all that stuff to like unlearn these things. But like, to do that from a point of like healing yourself versus a point of like hopelessness in the state of relationships.
Yeah.
That's very different.
And also versus like a point of hate. It's like both men and women, it's like we just hate each other so much. And like that's making ourselves like even more lonely. And like there's no coming back, because like I've already decided that I hate you and I'm mad at you. Yep. When it's like based on the polls and all of these things, like at the end of the day, like we all want love, and every single one of us are feeling lonely for different reasons. So
yeah. So a little bit more on hopelessness and like the effects of this loneliness and stuff, and also bringing it back to like a political lens as well. We found this one study that was showing like trends from 2014 to 2023, and it put it on dimensions of like despair being the bottom and hope being the top line that you see here. Having despair versus hope, and then control versus freedom is kind of like conservative versus liberal. Mm-hmm. And as you can see, like from 2014 to 2023, women have moved more from the control to the freedom. They're becoming more and more liberal, but they are still very much in that despair category. And then men are still, they've moved slightly towards the liberal side. Actually, when we look at things, they've gotten just a little bit more liberal, but not anywhere near, and this is globally, this graph is globally, anywhere near the rate as which women do, and they are even further on the despair side as well. Yeah. So
thank you for breaking that down, because not gonna lie, like the first time I looked at that graph, I was like, what the fuck is going on?
Like, what is going on? And then we see this in another graph. This is particularly just the US, right? So men are closer to the control side of the spectrum, whereas women are closer to the freedom side of the spectrum. So like liberal versus conservative. But both groups are plummeting down into despair. And they cite some of the reasons behind this being like post Me Too. Like they cite the Me Too movement, and women are becoming like more and more liberal about being anti-patriarchal, all of these things. But they're looking at the men, and, you know, they're growing in despair and hopelessness. And men on the other side too, like they are less likely to consider social issues as high of importance. They're looking more at the economic aspects of things, and they're losing a lot of hope too, because they don't see, you know, a place in which they can protect or provide under patriarchy. Like they're not necessarily believing in the idea of patriarchy, but because the economy is so bad, it's not great for them either. So it's like, even though they've gotten a little bit more liberal, they're actually claiming that men are more likely now to reinforce patriarchal ideas, because they're like kind of romanticizing this time when men were able to provide and be those success objects that like the men's rights activists talk about.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then just last graph, this is just worldwide. People are moving, you know, more and more towards despair rather than hopelessness. I mean, it's been since 2014 still, like we've been closer to despair than hopelessness, but than hope, sorry, closer to despair than hope.
Yeah.
But it keeps declining.
And this picture of like the hand coming out of the water, like it's very much giving that right now, honestly.
I know.
Perfect representation, no notes. Like that is exactly what it feels like. So Bell Hook says, isolation and loneliness are central causes of depression and despair. Yet they are the outcome of life in a culture where things matter more than people. Materialism creates a world of narcissism in which the focus of life is solely on acquisition and consumption. A culture of narcissism is not a place where love can flourish. The emergence of the me culture is a direct response to our nation's failure to truly actualize the vision of democracy articulated in our Constitution and Bill of Rights. Left alone in the me culture, we consume and consume with no thought of others. Greed and exploitation become the norm when an ethic of domination prevails. They bring in their wake alienation and lovelessness. Intense spiritual and emotional lack in our lives is the perfect breeding ground for material greed and overconsumption. In a world without love, the passion to connect can be replaced by the passion to possess. While emotional needs are difficult and often are impossible to satisfy, material desires are easier to fulfill. Our nation fell into the trap of pathological narcissism in the wake of wars that brought economic bounty while undermining the vision of freedom and justice essential to sustaining democracy. Nowadays, we live in a world where poor teenagers are willing to mime and murder for a pair of tennis shoes or a designer coat. This is not a consequence of poverty. In dire situations of poverty at earlier times in our nation's history, it would have been unthinkable to the poor to murder someone for a luxury item. While it was common for individuals to steal or attack someone in the interest of acquiring resources, money, food, or something as simple as a winter coat to ward off the cold, there was no value system in place that made a life less important than the material desire for an inessential object. And then lastly, Dan Kiley, in his groundbreaking work, The Peter Pan Syndrome, Men Who Have Never Grown Up, said, though they have reached adult age, they are unable to face adult feelings with responsibilities, out of touch with their true emotions, afraid to depend on even those closest to them. Self-centered and narcissistic, they hide behind masks of normalcy while feeling empty and lonely inside.
Yeah, huge, guys. And we see it with like these people like Andrew Tate and Cheer 7 that are like intentionally manipulating people for money. So now let's talk a little bit about the need to touch some grass and also the need for just more love and like relational skills in our culture. And Terrence Real says in his book, How Can I Get Through to You? Closing the Intimacy Gap Between Men and Women, which I read and loved, highly recommend. We talk about it in our Men Have Feelings episode. He says, the most reliable predictor of a long-term marital success was a pattern in which the wives in a non-offensive, clear ways communicated their needs and husbands willingly altered their behaviors to meet them. And he talks a lot about like women's silence and like because of patriarchy, women are quiet and they accept things and they don't push back and like whatever, but they also don't communicate their needs. So that's like one of the biggest keys to like you need to speak up for yourself, and men need to learn to listen.
Yes.
And that happens in personal and intimate situations. And then he also says in his book, Us, Getting Past You and Me to Build a More Loving Relationship, there is no place for objective reality in personal relationships. Objective reality is great for getting trains to run on time or for developing an important vaccine, but for figuring out which point of view is valid in an interpersonal transaction, it is a loser. And he echoes this in How Can I Get Through to You too, where he pretty much says like there's no point in arguing over who's right or who's wrong, like the gender wars, like you should do this, you should do that, da-da-da. We each are seeing like reality play out from our own corners of like our experiences in our identities. And so it's like you can validate how they're feeling while also sharing your perspective and not like speaking in I statements and not speaking in you statements kind of situation.
And it's like, I feel like a lot of things online, it's like women are just saying like, well, men don't listen, but we're not paying attention to that part of patriarchy where because of the gender binary and gender dynamics and power, we do kind of play a game to an extent. And like we said at the beginning, present a false sense of self to men, something that we think that they want. And so we're in turn not speaking up and not saying what we really feel. And that's like what we need to do. And then men also need to learn to listen.
And listen to them when they're voicing those uncomfortable things that put them out of like the object of like a patriarchal man in our mind, like expressing their feelings. Like that is when we really need to listen.
Yeah. I love that. I feel like I'm like really getting it. Like
hey.
I feel like this could be like my warped sense of you just like being superwoman, like how we always talk about, like that's how I look at you. Like I feel like you always get it. You know what I mean? But right now I feel like I'm like really getting it.
Connecting the pieces.
And I'm feeling like so like, yeah, I'm just like, this is what we need to be on. Anyways, so now we're going to look to bell hooks again when it comes to love. And again, this is from her book, All About Love. So the whole book was literally about love and like queer love, romantic love, family love, you know, being abused as children, not having love, like everything about love. Highly recommend the book. And it's not super long. Like it's a quick read. Well, I mean, not for me, but to a person that reads, I feel like it's a quick read. So she says, regardless of the intensity of the male masquerade, inwardly, many men see themselves as the victims of lovelessness. Like everyone, they learned as children to believe that love would be present in their lives, although so many boys are taught to behave as though love does not matter. In their hearts, they yearn for it. That yearning does not simply go away because they become men. Lying, as one form of acting out, is a way they articulate ongoing rage at the failure of love's promise. To embrace patriarchy, they must actively surrender the longing to love.
Yeah.
This new generation of American men had experienced the feminist cultural revolution. Many of them had been raised in homes where fathers were not present. They were more than happy when feminist thinkers told them that they did not need to be macho men. But the only alternative to not turning into a conventional macho man was to not become a man at all, to remain a boy. By choosing to remain boys, they did not have to undergo the pain of severing the too tight bonds with mothers who had smothered them with unconditional care. They could just find women to care for them in the same way that their moms had. Like we always say, like men are just looking for a mom, a mother.
Literally.
And how we kind of look for a daddy. Like,
you know? Freud.
When women failed to be like mom, they acted out because we're not going to be like mom.
No,
like we're learning to
mother.
love you and get to know you. We don't just have that unconditional care off fucking jump.
Right.
It's
you got to grow up.
Yeah. Initially, as a young militant feminist, I was thrilled to find a man who was not into being the patriarch. And even the task of dragging him, kicking and screaming into adulthood seemed worthwhile.
Bro, same.
In the end, I believed I would have an equal partner, love between peers. But the price I paid for wanting him to become an adult was that he traded in his boyish playfulness and became the macho man I had never wanted to be with. I was the target of his aggression, blamed for cajoling him into leaving boyhood behind, and blamed for his fears that he was not up to the task of being a man. By the time our relationship ended, I had blossomed into a fully self-actualized feminist woman, but I had almost lost my faith in the transformative power of love. My heart was broken. I left the relationship fearful that our culture was not yet ready to affirm mutual love between free women and free men.
And that's so, because I feel like so often we're like, oh, like he's just a boy, like he's not a man or whatever. And we look at it in terms of like patriarchy, like him not being like tough enough, protective enough, whatever. But he needs to maintain those playful, sensitive, soft qualities. But to fully become a man, he needs to not look at women as his mother or look at them to carry like the burden of his stuff as well. So it's like there is still an aspect, just like women, like to become like women and not just like girls. Like there is a maturity aspect of things.
Right.
You know?
And I think a lot of the gender wars has to do with too, it's like with the Me Too movement and like sexual assault and with sexual assault and domestic violence, it's like women are like the patriarchy is used against us. Like we are being actively harmed by men. So if men look at us like this way, let's look at them like the patriarchal version of men. And now, yes, we want you to be macho. Like we want you to do that because you're looking at us like this. So we're going to like have you be disposable and reinforce that too. And I think this is just like a great example, like summing that all together. But yeah, I think that was a great thing to end on. It's like we got a little bit of everything in there. It's like how patriarchy affects all of us, like in terms of lying and relationships and what that looks like. Heartbreak and how that feels and losing that you like, and I feel like you've experienced that, like where you're like, I've lost hope in like transformative love and like real love because I've been shot down so many times.
Yeah.
And like you're even still here to sit here and be like, yeah, like men's rights matter, like even after the shit you've been through, and like that is transformative, that is revolutionary. And that should prove to you and to I that it's like we still do believe in that love and that connection, because as it boils down to, like we saw with the science studies, it's like we all really do want love. Like there's power in numbers, community. Like that is true. We do not want to be alone. Like we don't want to die alone. We want to find someone. So
yeah. All right. So this brings us to the very end of the episode, guys. We've made it. It's super long, but we're going to wrap up with what we're wet, dry, and still confused about the topic, because it's okay to be confused, and we will probably be building on this topic for the rest of our careers.
Live lives.
Literally. Literally. So I'll start. I'm so wet, honestly. One, because this feels like such a full circle for us as like creators and feminists and like analyzing sex, relationships, personal identity, like the ways that we've grown. And like we said at the beginning of the Gender Wars episode, our first Gender Wars episode was December 14th, I believe, of 2023. And this episode is coming out on December 26th. It's the last one of 2024. And so it's really like a full circle moment. Our Gender Wars episode was the first one that took off for us, that we got like a good amount of views, like over 1,000, that we got comments, a lot of hate. And it sparked this new conversation about like gender, and it switched our perspective because we were going down a path that I think was similar to what we're talking about with like kind of toxic forms of feminism. So like, I'm really proud of us and like all of the episodes and topics that we've covered leading up to this moment, and like referring back to people like Bell Hooks, Audre Lorde, Terrence Real, to kind of look at things from what they were saying back then and like bringing it into the present day and like what we can really do about this. So like ultimately doing that and like how much we've learned and grown, I think it gives me a lot of hope despite the amount of despair like going on in the gender wars, that like it is possible to change minds. And I'm excited that we also have an audience that's small but growing, but we have literally doubled our audience since like last year on YouTube and stuff, like
Spotify Wrapped and YouTube.
Yeah, exactly. So like we have grown, and it's like, and we do want to make a change. I think that's the biggest reason we do this. We don't get paid. You know, like we have a real passion for it, and it's not like us just educating you guys, but it's us educating ourselves and truly wanting to be better, because it does not feel good to be in that place of like loneliness and hopelessness that so many of us are in. And with the upcoming political atmosphere and everything that is going on. Like, I was even scrolling on TikTok the other night, like, oh my God, everything is making me like so fucking depressed. Like, it's hard to find a piece of content sometimes that is not making me want to curl up into a ball and like be like, what the fuck is happening? But right now it's so important for us to find community, to find connection, to continue to like push back, be a dissenting voice, as Bell Hooks says. And so all of that I'm very wet about.
Wait, to be a dissenting voice?
Yeah, to be a dissenting voice, like Bell Hooks had said, like to go against like even her criticizing Oprah or her criticizing Spike Lee,
to
or
have
something
that
like,
new way,
and not just them, but she was also criticizing like white supremacy and gender roles and patriarchy, but like to go against the grain of what's happening, to have nuanced conversations, to look at things from different views, even if it results in a 4-hour fucking episode. That is what we want to do, and I personally take that inspiration all from Bell Hooks, and I hope that we can do that more. It's hard on TikTok, but we're trying.
Yes. I definitely echo all of what you just said. So proud of us and like everyone like tuning in right now and like working to unlearn this shit, because I think one of the biggest things we've proved to ourselves through doing all of these episodes the past year, and specifically the Gender Wars timeline and analysis, is like, it's really fucking hard to unlearn shit. And like, is it fun to like, you know, be constantly learning about this shit? No, like, it's hard. Like you said, like a bunch of this content makes you want to like curl up and die. Like, it's like depressing, but like it's so hard to unlearn these things. It's not easy. And people just say like unlearn patriarchy, like decenter men, like do this, but it's like really fucking hard. And I don't think I would be at the point I am that I am today without all of this research and like all of this work that we've like put into ourselves. Like you said, we're not making any money, and I'm also just the most wet that I'm not in my men are trash era anymore, that the hatred for men no longer exists in my body and like seeks to control me. It was one of the main reasons I became a sex worker and like made that decision to like get back at men and treat them as disposable human beings, which ultimately left me feeling very lonely and dark and just like unsure of where to go and lost. So I'm really wet that no longer exists for me, and just everything that we've learned throughout this episode and over the past year too. This is our last episode of 2024.
I know, it feels like a really full circle moment. And yeah, I think for dry, I mean, obviously I'm dry about the hate that like exists. Like, some of it is really like, it's just scary, you know? And I don't know. It's because it's like the manosphere side of things, I think, does take it to a whole other level. That is hatred towards women, but also very toxic to men, and the ways in which it's becoming more hateful on the women's side of things. Like, all of that makes me feel really hopeless, and how fucking normalized it is. And that just makes me sad. I mean, the political fucking climate, like, very dry about what a Trump presidency is about to show. Like, I think it's going to challenge us even more to, like, be fucking uncomfortable and continuously question things and fight things all the time, because we're going into 4 years that are not going to be very easy. So, like, I'm very dry about that. I'm dry about, you know, overall the state of, like, relationships and how we play this, like, game on both sides. But, like, I hope that, and it's, I think, our mission in a lot of ways to like bring the wholesomeness and the love and the connection back and the pleasure back to relationships, because we're not the podcast that's just like, we're trying to help you find just the one monogamous partner that you're going to be with for the rest of your life. We believe in polyamory. We believe in casual sex. We believe in different types of relationships. But like, at the core of what we do, like, I think we really believe in that connection aspect, and that doing what's like right for you. And considering all identities and stuff like that. And I'm excited for us to also get out of like the binary, like, we still have to talk about the binaries of gender. So I'm dry about that conversation, how we always fall back into like gender wars, men versus women. But I think we have to engage in it in order to push it forward. So like, it makes me dry every time we do a poll where it's like men this, women that, because I feel like we're not including like trans people, binary people, or non-binary people, which arguably like trans people, like you can vote still, obviously, in like men or women. Right. But still, like, that part can get like difficult.
Yeah. And we have conversations about that like almost every day, like about the gender binary. And like, we do need to talk about that, because that's how it is under patriarchy, but it's also on us to always include trans lives and issues into the discourse as well, and also people that don't operate under the gender non-binary, gender binary.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm mostly dry about the loneliness situation, though, on both ends of men and women. Obviously about the hate as well, and like all the comments online and how people are just like hopping on the bandwagon of things and not thinking critically. But I do think the loneliness is like a direct cause of like literally everything that we've talked about, like politics, dating, all of that. And it's like really depressing. It's not talked about as much for women, but especially on the men's side, I feel like a lot of women like make fun of men. Well, it's like you're lonely and alone because you fucking suck. And it's just not helpful at all. And again, I've thought those things too, but now I'm moving on. And last thing about being dry about like who's to blame, like algorithms, patriarchy. Like I am kind of dry that like it took me this long to realize like, yes, it's patriarchy, but also like we operate under it. Like we do have the chance to change things. No matter how big or small, it's changed regardless. And like we are enforcing patriarchy in a lot of ways that we do not realize. And we need to unlearn that because everyone, you know, does different nuanced things. It's not just like enabling men for toxic behavior. Like we reinforce patriarchy in a whole shit ton of other ways too, just like white supremacy as well. But yeah. And for confused, I think I'm confused about a lot of things. And again, this is something we're going to continue to build on forever. But I think for one, I'm confused a little bit about the censorship stuff. Like we've had this conversation multiple times. I'm confused about how to change that because I think we are very much going down a direction that is censoring everything from critical race theory to basic education to TikTok to all of that. And also how to toe the line when a lot of the conservatives and the right wing are like getting behind free speech stuff. And so it's like a yes and conversation. And so sometimes when you bring up free speech, it's confusing because you're seeing it's kind of been co-opted by the right. So that conversation is a little bit confusing. I want tangible ways. The more and more, I feel like it's becoming more and more of an issue that I'm like passionate about though, this like censorship, content education, media literacy conversation. So I want to figure out like maybe in 2025 more ways in which like I can actually have an impact on that besides just talking about it. Like who can I get behind, who's doing the work in the field. And lastly, I'm confused about so much more, but I'll keep it to one. Like us having this platform and having these like hours long discussions and these polls where people contribute to the conversation is fucking amazing. And I'm so grateful for it. But I'm also so confused about how to do this in like real life because there's so many times when I'm just like with my friend group and like a girl will be like, oh, you know, because men are trash or something like that, like someone I'm good friends with. And it's so like, I don't want to be that bitch that's just going to go on a fucking lecture about like, actually that's wrong, you know, and towing the line between it's like, because I can and I would love to and I will. And I'd love to sit with people who want to have hour-long conversations about how we should be rethinking this stuff. But that is not always like socially right. But then also like I'm going to stay up late at night feeling guilty about how I didn't say anything. So it's like I feel like I'm still trying to figure out the ways in which I can implement this in my daily life at work, with friendships, whatever, that is still not accepting things, but not going all the way off the deep end and talking about things in a simple way that is just, you know, putting a seed in there, but not trying to shove a whole tree in the hole, you know? So I honestly think that is the absolute biggest thing because I was kind of thinking of something along those same lines. It's like we have to have this unlearning light tapped in always and like have this reformative justice, like intersectional feminist tapped on always. And those small conversations with your friends and with your community are arguably the most important, but they're also the most hard. Like, and depending on what other identities people have in the room, like, and you're going to be telling them, like, it's just like really
and in between
hard.
Shots when you're about to go out, someone just says,
like, no, it's not real. It's like, kind of a downer. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of like, and also I'll echo all of that and I'll just add this. Like, I feel like we've learned through this episode that like social media like mimics real life. Like the problem is not the algorithms. Like the algorithms are feeding us stuff that we've taught it to feed us, and that real people are creating these content, having these beliefs in our world. And so it's like, how do we use social media as that restorative justice, like transformative tool that it could be used as? And it's like the censorship plays into that too. Like, how do we learn how to think critically? And we say all the time, like, with the internet, there should be like a class education in how to engage with social media,
Yes.
media criticism, how to think for yourself and like be that thinker, not that capitalist worker that the society's taught you to be, and not be afraid to speak up. And all of those things. So I think that's the biggest thing for me.
Yes,
You like
I'm
that?
so proud of you. Like, I'm so
Thank
proud
you.
of us right now. I'm really
I
having like
know.
a full
We're
circle
geeking.
fucking moment.
Like, yeah,
But-
I didn't think those words would ever come out of my mouth. Like, no lie. But if you guys made it to the end of this episode, we love you so much. Thank you so much for listening. And for everyone that listened, make sure you are subscribed on YouTube. Follow us on Spotify and Apple. You can also like the episode on YouTube. It would help us so much. And please, out of every episode we've ever fucking done, this is the episode to comment on. Like, if we get enough comments, we will literally do an episode like doing this again and reading y'all's comments, because we want more people in the conversation. At the end of the day, we're very small creators. We want more voices heard, and like that is literally our goal, to unify, create community. That's what we're talking about. That's what we're missing in the society. Also follow us on Instagram at So Wet So Dry. The O's are zeros, so you can participate in our polls. Again, submit listener stories for the episode, and
And yes, we also do have listener support, 99 cents, $4.99, or $9.99 a month. And yeah, that about does it. We will catch you guys in 2025. Bye. Did you know that the roots of the manosphere actually started in the feminist movement? Back in the 1970s, there was the men's liberation movement, which was coincided with the feminist movement. The men's liberation movement was all about rejecting gender roles. They argued that they were seen as success objects and that patriarchy imprisoned them to aggression and emotional constipation. Pretty much, they also believed that the codes of patriarchy and toxic masculinity prevented them from being their full selves, just like women. So there was this guy named Warren Farrell, who was one of the leaders of this men's liberation movement alongside feminists, and he was actually really good friends with Gloria Steinem. Here's this picture of them together. In the early 90s, Warren Farrell got fed up. He had been going on all of these feminist talks alongside women, but he didn't believe that women were seeing his issues as a man. So he wrote this book called The Myth of Male Power, in which he pretty much just said that he got really good at saying what women wanted to hear, but that wasn't the truth. In actuality, men were oppressed by women. The Myth of Male Power, he argues that men are oppressed in glass cellars instead of glass ceilings, such as the war machine, dangerous profession, suicide, false rape accusations, and that women actually have more economic power, and that women actually have more power in whole. This is obviously a little insane, but the beginning of his ideas for the book were rooted in feminism. Feminists did argue that men were imprisoned in these glass cellars of masculinity where they were seen as disposable, held back from expressing their true emotional selves. But he took it to a whole nother level when he decided to blame women. Around 2008, when the blogging era was really thriving, this guy named Paul Elam, which is male backwards, but that's his actual last name, read Warren Farrell's The Myth of Male Power and was inspired. So he started this blog called A Voice for Men. A Voice for Men had a bunch of different writers under the men's human rights movement. They argued that they were non-violent and didn't hate feminists, but a lot of their articles blamed women for pretty much everything. On this blog, red pill theories really started to take off, and then you get the incels, men going their own way, and MRAs, or men's rights activists. There we move into characters like Gary Vee, Jordan Peterson, Andrew Tate, and everything just snowballs. So check out the link in my bio for a complete breakdown of the gender wars.